1827 AD, 57:21 AM. After 6 years of intense fighting against the Turks, the Greeks won their independence after the combined navies of Britain, Russia and France defeated the Turkish navy in the Battle of Navarino. 1828 AD, 57:22 AM. The 52nd year of the United States Declaration of Independence was the 52nd hundredth year of the ancient American calendrical system preserved by the Olmecs, and 1872 years after the start of the Roman Julian calendar, or 52 times 36 years. In this year, President Andrew Jackson was elected, and after an internal investigation of the 11,000 federal employees of the American government, President Jackson fired 2,000 men and women who all had ties to the Rothschild banking dynasty of Europe. Many of these employees were closet Jews who had early on Americanized their names. The move enraged the Rothschilds and they vowed vengeance. The first passenger railroad train began operations in the United States, the Baltimore and Ohio, starting on July the 4th. Noah Webster published his world-famous Webster's Dictionary. This long-researched work was increasingly necessary because American English had already deviated quite a bit from European English, having absorbed so many French, Spanish, German, Dutch, African and Indian words. The Museum of Leiden in the Netherlands acquired an ancient manuscript written by the sage Ipuwer that described perfectly the plagues of Egypt and total devastation of Egypt and the cities of the Nile. At the time, its relevance to the biblical story of the Exodus was unknown. It would be discussed by professionals in 1902, and then the findings relating it to the Exodus would be released in 1909, one Synagogue of Satan, to A Patriot's History of the United States. 1829 AD, 57:23 AM. The Russian army invaded Turkey. Under the Treaty of Adrianople, Greece was declared a free state from the Turks, but now she was subjected to European dominance. A German king was appointed to rule Greece. The first recorded racial riot occurred in the United States. White Americans, angered over the increasing criminality among the blacks in Cincinnati, led many whites against the local blacks. British millionaire James Smithson died, leaving money behind for the establishment of an institute in the United States that would increase knowledge among men. This is the origin of the Smithsonian Institute, which originally set out to fulfill this dictate, but over the passage of time, special interest groups, corporate pressures, and the needs of industry and government intrusion altered the Smithsonian Institute into one of the most damaging knowledge filters in the world. For many years, the oddest archaeological artefacts, fossils of petrified humans, and even gigantic human bones and relics were all sent to the Smithsonian for further validation and study, but none of these shipments were ever heard from again. 1830 AD, 57:24 AM. Charles Lyell publishes his famous Principles of Geology, postulating that geological formations are created over millions of years. Scientists hold the work as the scientific work of the decade, but the Christian world dismisses it as absurd, one human accomplishment. 1831 AD, 57:25 AM. The North Magnetic Pole was first measured. By 2006 AD, scientists discovered that not only is the magnetic field of the Earth weakening, but it has wandered 500 miles from its 1831 position. Scientists as of 2007 now claim that the magnetic drift has accelerated to 25 miles a year. Though Nibiru or Phoenix are not officially recognised by science, there are many astronomers and astrophysicists who assert that there must be another planet or planets in our solar system to account for the many solar system anomalies. By 1831, Nibiru had already passed aphelion, furthest distance from the Sun, and was already 151 years back toward the inner solar system, the entire journey of Nibiru being 366 years. As of 2012 AD, Nibiru is only 34 years away from passing very close to Earth. which explains the increase in magnetic drift and its sudden spike. Phoenix 2 approaches the inner system, and as of 2012, the intruder world is only 28 years away. 2007 Almanac. 1832 AD, 57:26 AM. As a result of the Black Hawk War in this year, the Sauk and the Fox Indians crossed the Mississippi River in their fight against US expansion. Comet Biela was seen. 1833 AD, 57:27 AM. A spectacular meteor shower is viewed over the United States in November 12 to 13th. The island of Taranaki vanished in the Pacific with all of its inhabitants. Search vessels found no trace of the island or any survivors. At Lompoc Ranch, California, soldiers excavated among carved shells, huge stone axes and blocks of porphyry with an unknown script the skeleton of a man that once stood 12 feet in height and had a double row of teeth. Interestingly, the Hulin section of the Berakthos of the Babylonian Talmud states that giants before the flood had numerous rows of teeth. More gigantic humans were found with double dentition inside a mound near Clearwater, Minnesota. 1. Prophets of Doom. 2. Riddle of the Pacific. 3. Lost Cities and Ancient Mysteries of South America. 4. Secret Cities of Old South America. 5. Lost Cities of North and Central America. 1834 AD, 57:28 AM. The horrific Spanish Inquisition ends, this being 1296 years, 432 times 3, after the emergence of the papacy as supreme over all Christendom in 538 AD. In October, a fire destroyed the two Houses of Parliament, known as the Great Fire in London, 168 years after the Great Fire that destroyed London in 1666. 168 years is 24 times 7. 1835 AD, 57:29 AM. President Andrew Jackson was targeted for assassination by the international banking cartel begun by the Rothschilds. The firing of 2,000 federal employees was the first trespass he committed against these incredibly powerful men. Then in 1832, Jackson vetoed a request for charter renewal for the Second Bank of the United States, also owned by the Rothschilds. Now in 1835, an assassin attempted to shoot the president first with one pistol and then another, both pistols misfiring. Jackson was a true American hero, and sadly there were two other American presidents who also made war against the international banking cartel, and both of these men are still famous and both were assassinated, Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy. Even his brother Robert Kennedy would die for his meddling in the affairs of the world banks. On February the 20th at Concepcion, Chile, about 5,000 people died of an earthquake witnessed by the later-to-be famous Charles Darwin, author of On the Origin of Species. In 1835, the Liberty Bell cracked again. It had been recast with more iron than copper, while tolling the death of US Chief Justice of the Supreme Court John Marshall, a pure constitutionalist of the integrity that has not revisited the Supreme Court since. The Seminole Indians of Florida under Osceola make war against the United States for American intrusion into their lands. By 1842, they would be relocated to Oklahoma. Halley's Comet returned on schedule. 1. Synagogue of Satan. 1836 AD, 57:30 AM. In the 60th year since the Declaration of Independence, President Andrew Jackson keeps his campaign promise to the American people. He refuses to renew the charter for the Bank of the United States. It would be 77 more years before the Rothschilds are able to conspire successfully against the American people with the Rothschilds' brainchild, known as the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, which is neither federal nor a reserve. The Mexican army under General Santa Anna besieged the Alamo Mission Fort in San Antonio, Texas, killing all the Texans defending it, including the famous Davy Crockett, a former pioneer and congressman of Tennessee. Later at the Battle of San Jacinto, Santa Anna is defeated by Sam Houston, and the independent Republic of Texas is begun, no longer under Mexico. The US inventor Colt in this year makes the first Colt revolver. The story behind the independent Republic of Texas is little known. The Mexican authorities had no problem with American settlers living in Texas, provided they released their slaves and ceased the practice of human trafficking. The American colonists grew in number and did not comply with this condition, prompting Santa Anna's military invasion to enforce the no-slavery laws. The Americans fought back, and those that died in the Alamo did so defending their right to own slaves. The creation of the Republic of Texas was not over American freedoms, or even any political American ambitions for the acquisition of new territory, but for the continuance of slavery. The year 1836 is precisely 204 years, 2448 months before 2040 AD, when planet Phoenix causes a major pole shift that completely alters the distribution of land masses by 30 degrees. The sum of 2448 is representative of cataclysm, just as the 10 plagues on Egypt at the Exodus event occurred in 2448 Annus Mundi, 1447 BC. As Texas had its beginning in 1836, we find that it will end in 2040, for as revealed in When the Sun Darkens, when the lithosphere slips, the Far East from Indonesia to China will be thrust northward as North America on the other side of the Pacific will be shoved southward. The central United States will be flooded in a matter of hours, as the Gulf of Mexico remains still while the North American continent is thrust into it. The sea level will rise like a tsunami and rush up to the landmass, completely swallowing Galveston, Houston, Austin, Dallas and Fort Worth, all the way to Tulsa, Oklahoma. When the lithosphere slips, the world's oceans initially stay in place, and the crust of the earth moves beneath them. North America will largely be under the Gulf of Mexico as South America is plunged into the Antarctic. The epicenter of crustal rotation will be northern Egypt, the site of the Great Pyramid. The destruction in the Americas is hinted at by the fact that 1836 is also 5208 of the ancient American Olmec calendar, this being 434 times 12. The sum of 434 is found in Chronicon 1, refers to judged time. 1. Synagogue of Satan. 1837 AD, 57:31 AM. Wilkinson released his Manners and Customs of the Ancient Egyptians. He being a renowned Egyptologist, this remained the textbook on ancient Egypt for decades. British Colonel Richard William Howard Vyse received permission to excavate at the Great Pyramid and Sphinx from Muhammad Ali of Egypt. Vyse appointed a civil engineer named John Perring to carry on the excavations while he himself was frequently away. The Giza project excavated the tons of rubble left behind by the Turks and Egyptians, who quarried away the white limestone casing blocks from the monument after the earthquake of 1356. For centuries, scholars had doubted and debated the existence of this beautiful white garment described by Herodotus, Strabo, Diodorus and others. But in 1837, the British expedition discovered some of these amazingly perfect 20-ton blocks at the lowest foundation of the structure still in situ. Archaeologists and engineers have marvelled over the precise symmetry of the smooth casing blocks, with their 0.1% tolerance on its surfaces. Vyse would later go on to publish his Operations Carried On at the Pyramid of Giza, 1837 AD. Amazingly, this parallels the year 1837 BC, when, as found in Chronicon 1, the sage Abraham was in Egypt studying the inscriptions that were found upon the surface casing blocks of the Great Pyramid, which is also the subject of Lost Scriptures of Giza. The parallel is deepened by the fact that in 1837 AD, the Englishman T. M. Lucas created a series of phonetic symbols embossed that could be understood by blind readers by touch. In this year he translated the New Testament of the Bible into this symbolic language for the blind, just as Abraham has translated the phonetic inscriptions on the pyramid, which became the core fundamental knowledge buried in the most ancient cosmological, religious and historical text on this planet, the Vedas, the Sumerian and Babylonian tablet epics, the Egyptian fragments that became the Book of the Dead, and so many others that also found their way into the Old Testament. Using gunpowder to unblock the southern shaft, Vice's men, one specifically named R.J. Hill, discovered an iron plate in the shaft of the king's chamber. It was a foot long and 4 inches wide, an inch thick. It had been embedded inside the masonry at the far end of the shaft. In 1989, scientists found that the strange plate had been smelted at a temperature of 1,000 degrees. Amazingly, these discoveries at the Great Pyramid, which stood at that and this date at 203 levels of masonry, was exactly 203 years before the global disasters that will ruin the modern world in 2040 AD with the transit of Phoenix. Colonel Vice is also responsible for a devastating forgery that has crippled Egyptology. Before 1837, the ancient monument had remained bare of any Egyptian hieroglyphics. Not even a mummy was interred within the structure. In fact, as readers of Chronicon 1 know, the Giza complex is much older than Egyptian civilization, and the Egyptians themselves left records that they had found the pyramids buried in sand. Then they spent 1,000 years trying to copy them to no avail. High in the structure, tucked into a relieving chamber, Colonel Vice painted an incorrect cartouche for what he thought would be interpreted as the god Khufu, knowing that it was a theory that Khufu built the structure. Vice was catapulted into instant fame for the discovery, but many scholars have since admitted it a forgery. In 1837, the Japanese saw a ship approach their shores with a flag they had never seen, the red, white and blue stars and stripes of America. The US ship was returning Japanese sailors who were found adrift in the Pacific. Adhering to their isolationist stance, the Japanese opened fire with cannons, driving the Americans off. 1. The discoverers, Borston. 2. Egypt, child of Atlantis. 3. Atlantis and the kingdom of the Neanderthals. 4. A short history of the world. 1838 AD, 57:32 AM. In violation of the Supreme Court decision in Worcester versus Georgia, 1832, General Winfield Scott led the army in the rounding up of 12,000 Cherokee Indians, men, women and children in Georgia, and marched them across North America to Oklahoma. This event has gone down in American history as the Trail of Tears, about 3,000 Indians dying en route by starvation and disease. Some of the deaths were murders by American soldiers. After 10 years studying the moon, the German astronomers Johann Madler and Wilhelm Beer published their research in Der Mond, the moon, claiming that the moon had artificial constructions, and their book even provided maps showing the locations of these structures. 1. A Patriot's History of the United States, 2. Elder Gods in Antiquity. 1839 AD, 57:33 AM. A massive continental earthquake occurred from Turkey into Russia. The Opium War began between Great Britain and China. Chinese officials, sickened by the addictions of their people to opium that was used by the British to control the Chinese, these officials destroyed 2,000 chests of opium. The British retaliated swiftly, and the Chinese would again be subdued in 1842, when the British occupied Hong Kong. The astronomer de Coupis recorded that he witnessed a massive object moving through the inner solar system. 1. Book of the Damned. 1840 AD, 57:34 AM. An earthquake created the almost 2-mile deep Ahura Gorge that is deeper than the Grand Canyon. It is a mile wide, and many report that it is more spectacular than the Grand Canyon. The gorge splits the northern part of Mount Ararat in Turkey in half. Sir Henry Rawlinson translated the Assyrian cuneiform texts from analysing the trilingual inscription found upon the Behistun rock in northwestern Persia, Iran. 1. The incredible discovery of Noah's Ark. 1841 AD, 57:35 AM. The Great Seal of the United States, designed by Barton with the Great Pyramid and Eye and Phoenix, had its die retired. This was 66 years, 792 months, after the War for Independence began in 1775. 1. Gods of Eden. 1842 AD, 57:36 AM. The British defeat the Chinese, and through the Treaty of Nanking, the opium trade is reinstated, even forcing China to legalise opium and pay restitution for the 2,000 chests they destroyed in 1839. On October the 27th, a Roman Catholic demonstration in the US had a priest amass a pile of Protestant Bibles in public and before witnesses burn them to ashes. Another Catholic demonstration against Protestant Bibles would be performed in 1902 AD, exactly 60 years later, and all 30,000 participants would be incinerated by a volcanic eruption that very night. 1. Synagogue of Satan. 2. Popery fell of the Church. 1843 AD, 57:37 AM. An extremely brilliant comet is recorded by astronomers. It had a tail 500 million miles long. Sun is 93 million miles away. 1. Prophets of Doom. 1844 AD, 57:38 AM. Samuel Morse, inventor of the Morse code, demonstrated for the US Congress the effectiveness of communicating via metal wires over long distances. As they listened, the very first words that came over the telegraph to astonish the assembly were from the biblical book of Numbers 23:23, quote, "What hath God wrought?" unquote. The text reads, quote, "According to this time it shall be said of Jacob, Israel, what hath God wrought? Behold, the people shall rise up as a great lion," unquote. This is a prophecy of the re-emergence of the Israelite nation in the form of the people of the United States, the collective blood of Europe. Interestingly, the first prophet of Israel was Samuel. A vase was excavated from an ancient Egyptian sarcophagus, and discovered inside of it was a pea. The pea was planted in the herbarium at Highgate, London, and was of great interest, for having been in the tomb for 2944 years, the pea plant grew and produced a full crop of peas. 1. The world as will and representation. 1845 AD, 57:39 AM. A comet appears late in the year and splits into two cometary fragments, the comet named Biela. 1846 AD, 57:40 AM. Early in the year, the two fragments of Biela comet are seen by astronomer John Herschel. A new comet appears and is named Bronson, astronomers insisting that this new comet does not orbit the Sun but some other body. German astronomer Galle discovered Neptune in September. He searched in a region of space where astronomers predicted that another planet should be based on observed anomalies of Uranus. Neptune had 13 moons, and its orbital period is 164.8 Earth years around the Sun. The Smithsonian Institute opens up in Washington, D.C. 78,000 United States troops invade Texas and Mexico. Sir Henry Rawlinson's significant discovery popularized that he discovered an ancient Persian reference to the Israelites on the Behistun rock, a name of the Israelites, Bethsak, house of Isaac, after they were deported by Assyria. This was the 70th year of the United States of America. 1. Introduction to comets. 2. Cataclysm. 3. Foundations of astronomy. 4. Post-captivity names of Israel. 1847 AD, 57:41 AM. The United States defeats Mexico with 78,000 soldiers and cede Texas, New Mexico, Nevada, Arizona, and California, expanding the American landmass from the Atlantic to the Pacific. No other nation on this planet has ever exponentially increased its own territories two- and fourfold, as did the USA through the Louisiana Purchase and Mexican War. This major victory and American expansionism was in the 240th year since the first English colonists founded Jamestown in 1607. Also in 1847, the first iron building is constructed, an architectural engineering feat that would soon develop into skyscrapers. On December 8th, the sky blacked out on a clear day over Arkansas. Strange clouds materializing and a reddish glow appeared over Forest Hill before a huge explosion was heard from the sky. A meteorite then crashed outside of town, creating a hole 8 foot deep. Within minutes, the sky cleared. 1. Far Out Adventures. 1848 AD, 57:42 AM. There is a 3-month-long series of earthquakes throughout the Aegean and Mediterranean, damaging much property and killing wildlife, but only about 50 people died. The report of gold in California initiated the California Gold Rush, as some 80,000 people began to migrate across the face of North America. The Taiping Rebellion in China began, lasting until 1864. Rising hostilities in Europe against the papacy in Rome, due to invasive assumptions of power, prompted the Pope to flee Rome. The sulphur-tipped safety match was invented this year. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels published their Communist Manifesto. This birth of the spirit of communism was a great darkness that would shadow the Israelite-descended nations, and then the rest of the world for a century and beyond. Karl Marx was descended from Jewish rabbinical families on both sides, paternal and maternal, his real name being Moses Mordecai Levy. The anti-Christian communist movement was created and funded by Jews. Throughout Europe and the world occurred over 50 political assassinations and revolutions, as the monarchies of the world fell to democracies and republics. John Keel wrote that 1848 was also the start of the Industrial Revolution. Lieutenant William F. Lynch and military scientists of the United States conducted the most important study of the Dead Sea to date, performed on behalf of the US Navy. The Dead Sea was originally the Salt Sea, and in 1849 BC, the area was altered when the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed by fiery detritus from space. As this is the 72nd year, precessional year, of the United States, with people travelling further and further west, as prophesied in the biblical books, we are not surprised to find this is 2592 years, 864 times 3, after 745 BC, when the 10 tribes of Israel were deported into Assyria, beginning their migrations. The Pope's flight from Rome was 1242 years, 414 times 3, after 606 AD, when he was declared the universal bishop over all other Christian bishops. 1. The antediluvian world. 2. Iron Curtain over America. 3. Synagogue of Satan. 1849 AD, 57:43 AM. The California Gold Rush brought wide diversity to the western United States, as ships landed from all over the world, making San Francisco an international cosmopolitan population. 1850 AD, 57:44 AM. Archaeologists discovered the underground ancient library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, in Assyria, Iraq. Over 100,000 cuneiform tablet texts have been excavated from the site, yielding forth an abundance of data about the Middle East, 3,000 years earlier and beyond. The timing was perfect, for 10 years earlier, in 1840, cuneiform was first interpreted. This begins an astonishing series of discoveries of ancient Near Eastern texts that mirror biblical stories of the Old Testament. This was 5520 years, 552 times 10, from the year the ancient Jews claimed the beginning of their calendar began. 1851 AD, 57:45 AM. The first undersea cable was laid between France and England. During the reign of the famous Queen Victoria, Great Britain hosted the first World's Fair exhibiting the technological advancements of the age in the world's famous Crystal Palace. This glass building was itself a new innovation. The forum sparked the rapid advancement of the technological age. 1. A short history of the world. 1852 AD, 57:46 AM. Comet Biela returns as two distinct fragments. French inventor Giffard invented the first modern airship, a blimp. There are paintings and traditions as well as ancient Vedic texts that all describe blimps used in distant antiquity. These were called Vimanas in India. 1853 AD, 57:47 AM. United States warships forced Japan to open its ports and engage in open trade, which they had been reluctant to do due to their strict isolationist policies. New York City hosted the Second World's Fair, the first one in the United States. Technological advancements were being made faster than Europe could keep track of on a year-to-year basis. 1854 AD, 57:48 AM. The United States warships returned to Japan, headed by Commodore Perry. The Japanese were awed by the power of the steam engines and warships with mighty guns. He landed with a guard of 500 soldiers to sign the treaty, allowing trade and intercourse between Japan and America. The Japanese had very little to no outside contact for 216 years, 108 plus 108, since forbidding all Europeans access to their land in 1638. 1855 AD, 57:49 AM. A quake struck Tokyo, killing tens of thousands of people. 1856 AD, 57:50 AM. A humanoid skeleton was found in a limestone quarry in a valley near Dusseldorf. Now called Neanderthal, this type of humanoid was heavier, stronger, and still perfectly human, but with greater bone density and epithelial cartilage build-up, characteristic of a life that endured for a very long time. Some believe Neanderthal man was merely pre-flood human, who lived for centuries under biospheric conditions, vastly different than our own today. In France was discovered a prehistoric pterodactyl-type creature in stasis, hibernation, entombed in solid rock, that was supposed to be millions of years old. The creature was blasted out by workers in a tunnel system. The surprised animal stumbled forward, squawked and died. It was livid black and had a 10-foot wingspan. This creature had been sealed in porous rock for 4094 years, since the Great Flood in 2239 BC that entombed the Old World. Many insects, crustaceans, amphibians and reptiles share this trait, the ability to hibernate in stasis without water or food for extremely long periods of time, a characteristic that mammals do not share. 1. Lost Cities and Ancient Mysteries of Africa and Arabia. 1857 AD, 57:51 AM. The lost Cambodian city of Angkor Wat was rediscovered. Tools were found on the ground as if the builders had dropped them and fled. Believed to have been abandoned around 1300 AD, there is evidence that the ruins are much, much older. 1. Our Haunted Planet. 1858 AD, 57:52 AM. The British government for the first time altered the oath of Parliament that required new members to swear upon a Christian Bible and oath of allegiance. This was changed so as to allow Lionel de Rothschild a seat on the British Parliament. The international banking cartel was already in control of the British government. The Egyptian Antiquities Authority officially began with Viceroy Said Pasha's appointment of Frenchman Auguste Mariette to head the service, who was born in 1821. This authority put an end to unauthorised excavations. This year began the academic campaign to search only for evidence that the Giza complex was Egyptian in origin, rather than of any older civilization. Egyptology is a science of censorship. 1. Synagogue of Satan. 2. The Great Pyramids, Corteggiani. 1859 AD, 57:53 AM. Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species, a text that spawned into a global theory postulating an hypothesis that is passed off as fact. Institutions of learning began omitting all references to discoveries and artefacts that did not conform to the new paradigm. One of these knowledge filters was the Smithsonian Institute. John Taylor completed his work, The Great Pyramid. Why was it built and who built it? Though this was the date on the title page, the book did not get circulated till the following year in 1860. This was the first book that theorised that the Great Pyramid was of biblical importance. Dr. Lescarbot views black objects passing over the surface of the Sun, which were known to have been neither Mercury nor Venus. A coronal mass ejection from the Sun's surface, known as the Carrington event, reached the Earth and disabled telegraph wires throughout North America and Europe. The first US commercial oil well began production in Pennsylvania. The war between France and Germany concluded. The Catholic Habsburg dynasty armies were defeated. The papacy lost major holdings all throughout Italy. Pope Pius IX was reduced to rule over just the city of Rome and a small part of the countryside. 1. The Jesus Papers. 1860 AD, 57:54 AM. The Republican Party of the USA received its first victory with the election of Abraham Lincoln to the presidency, beating 3 other candidates. South Carolina was the first state to secede from the Union. Lincoln was against the extension plans of the slave states, plans to annex territories from Mexico in the south and beyond. These states that formed the Confederacy of the South were South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas, they electing Jefferson Davis as the president of their independent nation. The Confederate States of America drafted their own constitution specifically upholding the institution of slavery. Initially, Lincoln's objective was not the freeing of the African Americans in the United States, but the preservation of the Union that had quickly become two nations. Contrary to the historical propaganda put out by institutions of learning today, slavery was not the driving force for the breakaway. The international banking cartel of Europe had made it impossible for the southern states to sell their products. Commercial manipulation on the part of European banks isolated the southern states. Because the Rothschilds had been ousted by Andrew Jackson, they controlled Europe's imports and exports and created a situation where the southern states could not get what they needed for acceptable prices, and they couldn't sell what they manufactured and harvested. This was the 84th year, 7 times 12, since the Declaration of Independence, and 240 years since the Puritans landed at Plymouth Rock in 1620 AD. This was also exactly 180 years before the United States would again be broken apart, literally by the Phoenix Transit Pole Shift cataclysm of 2040 AD. John Taylor's book, The Great Pyramid, is an instant success as soon as it is released. His work theorising that the monument was a prophetic calendar erected by the biblical patriarchs, but he was scoffed at by the Royal Society. The academic world had already accepted that since the Great Pyramid is located at the edge of ancient Egyptian civilization, it must therefore be Egyptian. Taylor was the editor of the London Observer who had been inspired to write his book after Colonel Weiss returned from Egypt with his findings. Henry of the USA invented the repeat rifle. R.P. Gregg published his Meteorites and Fireballs from AD 2 to AD 1860, he being a member of the Geological Society of England. On April 11th over Pernambuco, the sky darkened on a cloudless day and planet Venus, although at this time at low visibility, shone brilliantly in the sky as around the sun appeared a corona. In July, a meteorite coated with ice fell at Dhurmsala, India, and later many meteorites like different-sized cannonballs rained upon India. Angular black pebbles rained over Wolverhampton, England, so thickly they had to be shoved away. 1. A short history of the world. 2. Pyramid Quest. 3. Invisible Residence. 4. Book of the Damned. 1861 AD, 57:55 AM. The American Civil War begins on April 16th. The Confederate Army repelled Union forces at the First Battle of Bull Run, though the South had been badly outnumbered at Manassas, Virginia. The Civil War epitomized the internal conflict between Manasseh, Confederacy, and Ephraim, Union. This struggle for division reflected in the geographical name for the location of the first battle, Manassas. The US population at this time was about 31 million, of which in just 4 years of warfare, 600,000 would die. The real reason for the Civil War is best summed up by historian Andrew Carrington Hitchcock, quote, "Northern industrialists had used trade tariffs to prevent the southern states from buying cheaper European goods. Europe subsequently retaliated by stopping cotton imports from the South. Thus the South had been forced to pay more for goods while having their income slashed," unquote. Otto von Bismarck, Chancellor of Germany, admitted in 1876 that prior to the Civil War in America, it was already decided by the financial powers of Europe, Rothschilds, that the United States was becoming too powerful, with too many resources and land, and needed to be divided into two nations that could more easily be controlled economically. The issue of slavery, having been a political centre of controversy since the abolitionist societies of the 1700s, was used to exacerbate the division between the North and South. Gatling invents the machine gun. The legends of the giant squid came to life in this year when the French warship Alecton encountered and killed such a beast. The Great Comet was noteworthy in June because the Earth passed through its tail without any observable results. 1. Synagogue of Satan. 4. Book of Fabulous Beasts. 5. Introduction to Comets. 1862 AD, 57:56 AM. The Civil War naval battle between the ironclads, the Monitor and the Virginia, formerly called the Merrimac, lasted 5 hours and ended in a draw, neither armoured vessel able to penetrate the armour of the other. President Lincoln begins printing $450 million worth of greenbacks with no interest to the government, therefore no tax burden to the people. This money was used to purchase war supplies and to pay the troops. By printing national money in this way, Lincoln did not have to borrow the money from the Rothschild-controlled European banks, which would have indebted the nation to the Rothschilds. Because Lincoln could not be allowed to set this kind of precedent, he became a target for assassination, a threat that he considered, saying, quote, "I do not consider that I have accomplished anything without God, and if it is His will that I must die by the hand of an assassin, I must be resigned. I must do my duty as I see it and leave the rest with God," unquote. In the American classroom today, there are many quotes from Lincoln and others that are omitted, references to the belief that slavery was wrong but that separatism was right. Lincoln addressed a delegation of blacks who had come to plead for full emancipation. Quote, "You and I are different races. Whether it be right or wrong, I need not discuss, but this physical difference is a great disadvantage to us both, as I think. Your race suffer greatly, many of them living among us, while ours suffer from your presence. In a word, we suffer on each side. If this be admitted, it affords a reason at least why we should be separate. Your race are suffering, in my judgment, the greatest wrong inflicted on any people. But even when you cease to be slaves, you are yet far removed from being placed on equality with the white race," unquote. Lincoln adhered to the opinion of Thomas Jefferson, founding father of the American nation. Jefferson's quotes are also today subject to the same censorship. On the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C., is an inscription quoting Thomas Jefferson. However, the underlined part is omitted from the monumental inscription. Quote, "Nothing is more certainly written in the book of fate than that these people blacks are to be free," and underlined, "nor is it less certain that the two races, equally free, cannot live under the same government," unquote. Alvan Clark discovered that the star Sirius was actually a binary system. It has since been learned that Sirius is actually a trinary three-star system. Clark discovered Sirius B, which orbits its parent star every 50 years, and was known to the early Dogon people of Africa. A comet appeared with a very nebulous tail discovered first by astronomer Lewis Swift of the USA in New York. 3 days later, it was also discovered by Horace Tuttle of Harvard University. It became known as the Swift-Tuttle Comet. A huge asteroid comet passed through the inner solar system on its journey to impact North America in 2046 AD. 1. Synagogue of Satan. 2. Abraham Lincoln. 3. March of the Titans. 5. The Science Times Book of Natural Disasters. 1863 AD, 57:57 AM. In January, President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that the slaves in the rebel states of the Confederacy were free. The declaration would remain a powerless document for 2 more years when the Civil War ended. In his famous Gettysburg Address, Lincoln said, quote, "407 years ago our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure," unquote. President Lincoln and Tsar Alexander II of Russia form an alliance after they realise that they have a common enemy, the Rothschilds. Russia declares that it will go to war against any European nation that takes any side in the American Civil War. Russia sends warships from its Pacific and Atlantic fleets to both coasts of America to enforce this. This is exactly 54 years before the Jewish takeover of Russia in 1917 under the Bolsheviks. 1. Synagogue of Satan. 1864 AD, 57:58 AM. Submarine warfare begins first in the United States Civil War. The Confederacy employed the first submarine that had a fixed torpedo that struck the Union's Housatonic that was blockading Charleston, South Carolina. But the Confederate submarine was damaged in the blast and sank as well, killing all aboard. Inspired by Taylor's work in the Great Pyramid and seeking to disprove it, Astronomer Royal of Scotland Charles Piazzi Smythe went to Egypt with his wife at his own expense, where he took careful measurements of the monument in late 1864 and early 1865. During this period, Smythe became convinced of the Great Pyramid's biblical import. Robert Menzies developed a theory that the interior passage length of the structure was a fixed geometrical timeline of world history, each pyramid inch a distinct year in history. Smythe adopted this view and even provided evidence for the pyramid calendar. However, because Taylor, Smythe, Menzies and even D. Davidson much later all had inaccurate chronologies of world history, neither considering the orbital periods of planets Phoenix and Nibiru, the pyramid inch theory has suffered much deserved criticism. For a review of the Great Pyramid's internal timeline, see Chronotecture, Lost Science of Prophetic Engineering. 1. Invisible Residents. 1865 AD, 57:59 AM. The Civil War ended April 9th with surrender of Confederate General Lee to Union General Ulysses Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. On April 15th, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated and died by the pistol of John Wilkes Booth. The uncanny parallels between the assassination of John F. Kennedy and Abraham Lincoln are listed under 1963 AD. Both American presidents were enemies of the international banking cartel. The Temple-Tuttle Comet passes. The Civil War is over 90 years, 1,080 months, after the start of the American Independence War in 1775. 1. Introduction to Comets. 1866 AD, 57:60 AM. The major European powers of France, Spain, Austria, among others, renounced Roman Catholic papal authority, and the sovereign Vatican state, amidst Rome, was stripped of its power. In this, the very year that prophetic chronologists had predicted, Heidelberg, Calerius, Pareus, Gesner and Fleming. These men, even centuries earlier, believed that in 1866 the following biblical prophecy would be fulfilled concerning the Beast Empire, Roman Catholic Empire. Quote, "But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume and destroy it unto the end." Unquote. This was the fulfilled 1260 years since 606 AD, when the Pope was declared to be the universal bishop over all Christian bishops. 1866 AD was 4968 years, 552 times 9, of the Vedic calendar, or Black Age, and 3312 years, 552 times 6, after the exodus from Egypt in 1447 BC. In the south, the freed blacks were struggling to take care of themselves, liberated from the white southern plantation owners. Living conditions plummeted drastically for southern blacks, and many Jews from the northern states moved into the south and set up their loan sharking companies throughout the south. And in a few short years, the blacks of the south went from civil servitude with all their needs met to indentured servants who were literally owned by the Jews, who loaned them money against their growing crops, money that had to be paid back at exorbitant interest even if the crops failed. In California, beneath Table Mountain, the famous Calaveras skull was discovered beside a fossilized tree in a mine tunnel within prehistoric strata. Annual Leonid meteor showers were unusually bright this year. Volcanic activity was recorded at Santorini in the Aegean. Nobel was a Swedish manufacturer who in this year invented dynamite. Strangely, the Nobel Peace Prize would be named after him. 1. Today, Tomorrow and the Great Beyond. 2. Daniel. 1867 AD, 57:61 AM. The Shogun warriors form an alliance for the government of Japan called the Shogunate. It would survive more than a year. Comet 9P Temple was discovered, having a 5.5-year orbit. 1. Introduction to Comets. 1868 AD, 57:62 AM. The Meiji Restoration ended the Shogunate of Japan. the city of Tokyo becoming the capital of the nation. The Russians annexed Samarkand, New Samaria, which was founded by the ancient migrating Israelites that escaped to Syria in the 6th century BC. 1869 AD, 5763 AM. The Ku Klux Klan is dissolved after the federal government abolished the white disenfranchisement laws that gave over white properties to former slaves. Blacks are granted citizenship in the United States, the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution. The Suez Canal was cut through Egypt from the Mediterranean to the Red Sea under British oversight. The British already controlled the entrance of the Mediterranean, the Strait of Gibraltar, fulfilling the biblical prophecy that the descendants of the Israelites would possess the gates of their enemies. Straits, capes like South Africa, and canals for ships are gates of the sea. The scholarly world was introduced to the existence of a civilization antedating the Akkadians, named Sumerians, by Jules Oppert at the French Society of Numismatics and Archaeology. The First Vatican Council convened under Pope I, where it was determined with much opposition that the papacy is infallible. The doctrine of papal infallibility offended many in the Catholic hierarchy, but they were effectively silenced. 1. March of the Titans. 2. The Stairway to Heaven. The gods who came to planet Earth. 1870 AD, 5764 AM. On February the 12th, a luminous object was seen in the sky over Italy, attended with an earthquake and followed by a rain of sand the next day. Papal infallibility received a majority vote by the strong-arm tactics employed by the Pope. On June the 18th, the Pope issued a decree stating that in whatever the Pope declares, he is infallible. In the same edict, Protestantism is condemned. A couple of months later, the Italian government invaded the countryside belonging to the Pope, taking it. This left the Pope nothing but Vatican City to rule. Later in the year, on September the 20th, both Rome and the Pope are captured by an excommunicated king. The Pope's woes were 1332 years, 666 plus 666, after 538 AD, when Justinian declared the supremacy of the papacy. The Franco-Prussian War begins when the Germans of Prussia invade France, defeating 2 French armies in this year. In 1871, Paris would surrender. 1. Book of the Damned. 2. Popery, foe of the Church. 3. The Jesus Papers. 1871 AD, 5765 AM. Prime Minister Otto von Bismarck, known as the Iron Chancellor of Germany, unifies the nation and instigates a series of victories against the French, against Denmark and Austria, and proclaims a German empire. The Franco-Prussian War ends and the communists in Paris set up the Commune of Paris and held the government for 2 months before they were crushed, 20,000 people dying in the conflict. This was the first communist revolution in history, a doctrine created by Jews but many would follow. The Illuminati agent Albert Pike, an American general, completes his blueprint for 3 world wars that would result with the one world government the Rothschilds sought to create. The World War is to change the government of Russia, which was done in 1917 with the Jewish Bolshevik Revolution. The Second World War is to change the government of Germany and cripple the might of England, which was done brilliantly when the World Jewish Congress declared war on Germany in 1938. The Third World War is to be fought against Islamic nations. A huge fireball was seen in the sky over Chicago, just prior to the Great Fire of Chicago. Fires were started in the countryside in the surrounding counties around the city, and astronomers Hind and Denning in November saw a large object pass over the surface of the sun. Aggravated by gale-force winds, the city of Chicago burned with a fiery tornado that even burned granite, marble and iron. Antonio Meucci invented the telephone 5 years before Bell in America independently did so, but Bell was traditionally recognised for the discovery. Heinrich Schliemann began excavating the ruins of Hisarlik in Turkey, a location he believed was the ancient ruins of Troy. Though scholars believe the site is correct, it is generally believed now that Schliemann dug through the actual strata of the Homeric Troy into older levels of the city. The French relinquished the provinces of Alsace and Lorraine to the Germans. Excluding Austria, all of Germany was united into an empire. Known as the Pax Germania, this would last about 43 years to World War I. Bishop Spotswood revealed the intensity of the Catholic animosity for Protestants in America when he openly declared, quote, "I would rather a half of the people of this nation, America, should be brought to the stake and burned, than one man should read the Bible and form his judgments from its contents," unquote. 1. March of the Titans, 2. Synagogue of Satan, 3. Book of the Damned, 4. Cataclysm, 5. Popery, foe of the Church. 1872 AD, 5766 AM. Queen Victoria of Britain officially assumed the title of Empress of India. This parallels the political situation in 1872 BC, when the Chedorlaomer of Elam, Harappan Valley, northern India, subdued the western powers of the world at the time, Babylonia, Anatolia and Canaan. The Mary Celeste, a half-brig vessel, sailed from New York toward Genoa, but was found drifting in the Atlantic by another ship, all of its passengers having vanished with the crew. The city of Boston burned in a fire. About 1,000 buildings were ruined. Wayman Dixon discovered the sealed-off ventilation shaft of the Queen's chamber after pushing a wire into a crack for a considerable distance. George Smith, born 1840, the year cuneiform was deciphered. A self-taught translator of ancient cuneiform writings, having never attended high school or college, spent time in the British Museum translating the ancient Babylonian and Assyrian tablets. He translated the Epic of Gilgamesh, which concerned Nimrod, who was subdued by Chedorlaomer in 1872. The epic concerned the flood and Noah, and created a media sensation in England. Smith went on to become a lead archaeologist in expeditions to the Middle East, to discover a missing fragment of the epic as well as other texts and artefacts, writing a series of academic works on Assyrio-Babylonian history. It is interesting to note that in 1872, the officially written language internationally was cuneiform. Hotchkiss of the USA invented the improved machine gun. A brilliant November meteor shower exhibited over 150,000 shooting stars within a 6-hour period, believed to be the remnants of Comet Biela. 1872 BC was the last year Chedorlaomer exercised dominion over Nimrod. Mount Vesuvius erupted in Italy. An earthquake caused loss of life in California. 1. The Great Pyramid, Smythe. 2. The complete story of the San Francisco Horror. 1873 AD, 5767 AM. Heinrich Schliemann discovered the ruins of Troy in Asia Minor, finding many artefacts in this year. Schliemann was made famous for the discoveries. However, he was not the first to think that the mound at Hissarlik was the ruins of Troy. In 1822, a Charles McLaren had already thought that this was the location of Homer's Troy. 1. The Wars of Gods and Men, Sitchin. 1874 AD, 5768 AM. 3 distinct earthquake shocks were felt at Cairo, Egypt, just miles away from the Great Pyramid. All 3 occurred during the transit of Venus. Astronomers watching the planet traversed the disk of the Sun through their telescopes. Due to the placement of a black federal army in New Orleans, who were decidedly in favour of local blacks in the city's disputes, 3,500 white men, KKK and the White League, rioted and took over the city of New Orleans. They were later driven off by federal forces. White Southerners were livid with the federal government's handling of the Reconstruction, when blacks were given all the financial and aid advantages and whites were losing their properties. 1. The Great Pyramid, Smythe. 2. March of the Titans. 1875 AD, 5769 AM. US Congress passed the Civil Rights Act, which barred discrimination against blacks. In December, the Rio de Janeiro Observatory reported seeing a vast number of bodies passing over the sun, some being luminous, clear, and others black, solid. 1. March of the Titans. 2. Book of the Damned. 1876 AD, 5770 AM. Colonel George Custer and the 264 soldiers of the 7th Cavalry were all killed in June in a daring ambush by the Sioux Indians in the Battle of Little Bighorn in Montana. Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone by accident, a device that would exponentially increase knowledge, engineering and science. His invention was preceded by that of Antonio Meucci's 5 years previously. Heinrich Schliemann excavated the ruins of Mycenae on the Greek mainland, the aggressors in the Trojan War and seat of King Agamemnon's power. 1239 to 1229 BC. Smith published the Chaldean account of the flood from the Akkadian texts, demonstrating that the Genesis narratives were abbreviated versions of older Sumerian texts. 1877 AD, 5771 AM. Archaeologists at Tel Amarna in Egypt discovered 377 ancient Canaanite tablets from frantic kings asking Pharaoh in Egypt for military assistance against the invading Habiru, Hebrews. These tablets dated at between 1411 to 1407 BC, when the Israelites were conquering Argob, Bashan and then Canaan, a land promised to them through their patriarch Abraham in the year 1877 BC. Of further significance in 1877 AD is the fact that Egypt's ruler Ishmael Khedive gave the United States the obelisk. This was the twin to Cleopatra's Needle, which had been given to the British and erected on the Thames in London. Ishmael was the firstborn son of Abraham through his Egyptian concubine Hagar. Both of these ancient obelisks were crafted in 1515 BC by the Israelites in Egypt under Pharaoh Thutmose III. These monoliths are the prophetic signatures of the two tribes born in Egypt, Manasseh and Ephraim, who were destined to become the greatest of all Israelite-descended empires, the United Kingdom and the United States of America. These obelisks today stand in London and in Central Park, New York City. It was in this year of 1877 that the British removed the obelisk that was priorly given to them by Muhammad Ali and set it up on the Thames River. In 1877, Asaph Hall astonished the astronomical community with his discovery of the two moons of Mars, and he named them Deimos and Phobos, fear and terror, after the two sons of the war god Mars. Mars had been diligently studied by hundreds of competent astronomers, and never were these moons present. Even its topography was studied, such as the ice caps at the polar extremities. Both of these moons are actually gigantic asteroids irregularly shaped. Phobos is the only satellite in our solar system that revolves faster than its parent planet. Mars rotates in 24 hours, but its moon Phobos rotates about every 8 hours. There are many who hold that Phobos is a hollow asteroid, possibly a vessel for extraterrestrial beings. Strange lights associated with Phobos have been reported more than once. Also in this year, Helen Blavatsky published Isis Unveiled, following this book with A Secret Doctrine, which she was finishing up in 1877, wherein she cites an old Vedic text entitled Vaivasata Manvatara, which depicted 5 human ages like Aztec stone of the 5th sun, dating back to Kali Yuga age, the Black Age before the Deluge, which she specifically calculated as having been, quote, 4989 years ago, unquote. Writing this in 1877 and calculating backward 4989 years gives us precisely the year 3113 BC, the start of the Mayan long count calendar. 1877 is 5771 Annus Mundi, and subtracting 4989 years is 782 AM, 3113 BC. Equally intriguing is Blavatsky's discovery in the Sanskrit texts that a great age is exactly 311, 040, 000, 000 years. This is a ridiculous length of time, even in days, but more accurately resolved to 3114. Much in the Vedic text is highly prophetic, and 3114 could just as easily be 3113, especially since scholars today are unsure if the Mayan long count began in 3114 or 3113 BC. In this year, Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, was born, died in 1945. This man will reveal the amazing significance of the year 1998 AD, 666 times 3, in prophetic chronology and its relation to the Great Pyramid. Prospectors in Eureka, Nevada area, searching for precious metals, found the preserved remains of a human leg in solid quartzite. It even had a complete set of human foot bones. 1. Judah's scepter and Joseph's birthright. 2. Today, tomorrow and the great beyond. 3. Alexandria. 4. Elder gods in antiquity. 5. The secret doctrine. 7. World of the odd and awesome. 1878 AD, 5772 AM. Cleopatra's Needle, having sailed from Egypt to England, is prominently placed on the Thames Embankment in London. It is placed upon a pedestal that contains within a large earthen jar with copies of the Bible in English, French and a Hebrew Pentateuch, the book of Genesis in Aramaic and the verse John 3:16, quote, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son," unquote, that was translated into 215 languages. This was Britain's birthright pillar, recognising her pedigree as of ancient Israelite stock, inheriting the promises of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, Israel. England's Prime Minister in this year happened to be a Jew named Benjamin Disraeli, who proposed in this same year in the Berlin Congress of Nations a program that would place the world's Jews back in Palestine, and the first settlement was called Petah Tikva, Door of Hope. Benjamin Disraeli said, quote, "The racial question is the key to world history. All is race, there is no other truth," unquote. During a total eclipse of the sun by the moon, Professors Watson and Rawlins of Wyoming and Professor Swift of Denver, Colorado, witnessed from different vantage points on the Earth two shining objects in the inner solar system near the sun. The erection of the Egyptian obelisk in London was precisely 2880 years, 144 times 20, after the Davidic throne was established in Jerusalem in 1003 BC. 1. Today, tomorrow and the great beyond. 2. Judah's sceptre and Joseph's birthright. 3. Jewish supremacism. 4. Book of the Damned. 1879 AD, 5773 AM. The obelisk of Thutmose III of Egypt, given to the United States by Ismail Khedive, is taken to New York City. Amazingly, in this year, in the Jewish Chronicle of May 2nd, 1879, we read, quote, "So far as the remnant of the house of Judah is concerned, the Israelites who were subjected by the Assyrian power disappear from the pages of history. The scriptures speak of a future restoration of Israel, which is clearly to include both Judah and Ephraim, Israel. The problem then is reduced to its simplest form. The 10 tribes are certainly in existence. All that has to be done is to discover which people represent them," unquote. At Brewersville, Indiana, was excavated a human skeleton measuring 9 foot 8 inches tall. 1. Alexandria. 2. Post-captivity names of Israel. 3. Lost cities of North and Central America. 1880 AD, 5774 AM. This year is calendarically connected to major ancient Israelite events. It is also connected to major Judahite, Jewish, events of biblical import. The obelisk from Thutmose III of Egypt is set up in Central Park, New York. Deposited into the foundation of the monument were copies of the New Testament cast in lead in several different languages. This is America's birthright as Ephraim, the empire of refuge that serves as the fulfillment of the historical prophetic Israelite cities of refuge in Levitical law. As the empire of adoption, America, unlike any other nation on this planet, will absorb the refugees of the world. In this same year, the United States absorbed thousands of Jews who had fled the pogroms in Russia, Poland, Bulgaria and Romania, which prompted over 1 million Jews eventually to migrate to America. This was the 5,550th year of the Jewish calendar, exactly 2592 years, 864 times 3, after the Judahites were delivered from the Assyrians in 713 BC, when 185,000 Assyrian soldiers were melted by a blast from the sky. The Russian pogroms were in response to the Russian people's anger at the Jewish money-lending practices and other financial schemes over the centuries. The Russian slaughter of Jews was exactly 400 years after 1480 AD, when Russia was delivered from Mongol control. The ancient capital of the 10 tribes of Israel was the city of Samaria, built in 881 BC. The setting of the Egyptian obelisk, crafted by Israelites in Egypt 1515 BC, was 2760 years, 552 times 5, after Samaria was built, and 1880 AD was also 2600 years, 52 jubilees, 52 times 50, after the last of the 10 tribes of Israel were deported in 721 BC by the Assyrians to begin their migration periods. This is further connected to the 1776 AD American Declaration of Independence, which was 104 years earlier, or 52 plus 52 years. Also in 1880, Charles Piazzi Smyth, Astronomer Royal for Scotland, published his findings in Our Inheritance in the Great Pyramid, constructed by Sethite ancestors of Abraham, wherein he concluded, in agreement with the very man he set out to discredit, John Taylor, that the gigantic monument was definitely of biblical importance. But Smyth's own theories went way beyond Taylor's. The popularity of the books by Taylor and now Smyth influenced the renowned archaeologist Sir Flinders Petrie to travel to Egypt, and using advanced instruments capable of making precision measurements to 1,000th of an inch, surveyed extensively the exterior and interior of the Great Pyramid in his effort to disprove the pyramid calendar theory. His own findings persuaded him that the structure encoded advanced astronomical information and terrestrial measurements of Earth and the solar system. Unfortunately for these men and subsequent pyramid enthusiasts, their conceptual interpretations on the pyramid calendar were correct, but the calendars they had available to them were corrupt. The idea of the pyramid inch did not survive in academic popularity, because they had to create mathematical evidence where in truth it did not exist. It would be in 2006 that the Great Pyramid's calendrical chronometrical secrets would be deciphered by a comparative analysis with a correct historical timeline and the most precise linear measurements of the interior of the monument ever conducted. These profound discoveries are in chronotecture, lost science of prophetic engineering. In 1880, Gaston Maspero in Egypt discovered the pyramid texts in the Pyramid of Unas and subsequent 6th dynasty monuments. Mystics in this year published literature exhibiting their knowledge of the dark satellite, a large astronomical body that passes through the inner solar system, containing a prison wherein are trapped primordial gods that had offended the Creator. Thomas Burgoyne published the fact that the dark satellite was in this year at perihelion. However, it was actually at 26 years after aphelion, furthest distance from the Sun, and returning toward the inner solar system to pass dangerously close to Earth in 2052 AD. 1. Judah's Scepter and Joseph's Birthright. 2. Synagogue of Satan. 3. Light of Egypt, Volume 1. 1881 AD. 5775 AM. Alexander II of Russia is assassinated, this being 36 years before the Russian noble family of the Romanovs are murdered by the Jewish Bolsheviks in 1917. The revised version of the Holy Scriptures is published and becomes an instant success exactly 270 years after the publication of the King James Authorised Version of the Bible in 1611. The British Museum quietly removes a prominent and famous display of a 5-foot 5-inch human female fossil embedded in hard limestone, discovered in 1812 off the French Caribbean coast of Guadeloupe, fearing that it was contrary to the rage at the time among scholars, evolutionary theory. The Great Comet of 1881 was photographed on June 30th. Clara Barton founded the American Red Cross. The famous gun battle between the Outlaws and the Earp brothers near the OK Corral occurred in Tombstone, Arizona. 1. Evolution Cruncher. 2. Introduction to Comets. 1882 AD, 5776 AM. Britain invades Egypt, occupied by the Turks. This was 1260 years since the start of the Islamic after Hijra calendar in 622 AD, and 2488 years, 1244 plus 1244, after 607 BC, when Egypt was subdued by the Chaldean king Nebuchadnezzar II, crown prince of Babylon. 2488 Annus Mundi, 1407 BC, was the year the ancient Israelites invaded Canaan. On July 3rd, the people of Lebanon, Connecticut, witnessed 2 triangular-shaped vessels flying in the sky over the moon. They were large, moved toward one another and then vanished. Later, over England in November, a gigantic cigar-shaped flying object was seen to move slowly through the skies, observed by telescope of the Royal Observatory of Greenwich on the 17th. Also in November, another great comet appeared in the inner system and again it was photographed like its predecessor in 1881. This comet passed between the Earth and the Sun, but no observable effects were noted. With hostilities little abated in Russia between the Christian Russians and the Jews, Russia passed the May laws against the Jews. These laws stopped them from certain financial practices, removing their businesses, and even forced many to migrate back into Eastern Europe, back to the region known as the Pale of Settlement, set up in 1772. This region was almost half the size of Western Europe. Immediately, international Jewish financiers tried to collapse the Russian economy. The Tsarist Russian government began negotiations with the banking house of Rothschild for a loan. But the Rothschilds backed out of the loan because the Tsar would not allow the Jews back in. The Tsar published widely an edict that read, quote, "For some time the government has given its attention to the Jews and to their relations to the rest of the inhabitants of the empire, with a view of ascertaining the sad condition of the Christian inhabitants brought about by the conduct of the Jews in business matters. With few exceptions, they, the Jews, have as a body devoted their attention not to enriching or benefiting the country, but to defrauding by their wiles the inhabitants, and particularly its poor inhabitants. This conduct of theirs has called forth protests on the part of the people, to put an end to the oppression practiced by the Jews on the inhabitants, and to free the country of their malpractices." Unquote. Unfortunately, in less than 40 years, the Jewish Bolsheviks would succeed in taking over Russia and exterminating over 20 million Christian Russians in retaliation for the May laws and other historical controversies between the Jews and Russians. 1. Book of the Damned. 3. Introduction to Comets. 4. Jewish Supremacism. 1883 AD, 57:77 AM. Archaeologist Neville excavated the Egyptian city ruins of Pithom, which was one of the treasure cities of Pharaoh, that the Israelites as slaves were forced to build. Neville found the city walls and noted that the walls were constructed of clay bricks. The clay bricks had straw in them among the lowest courses, but higher up in the walls the straw was lessened until the highest bricks had no straw at all. He noticed that the middle courses had straw that had been plucked up by the roots. This discovery confirms the Exodus story of the oppression of the Israelites, forced to make bricks with less and less straw. In 1908, Kyle would visit Pithom to confirm this discovery. For unexplained reasons, there was a whole wave of missing persons vanished from Montreal, Canada in July. Astronomers report seeing a train of irregularly shaped objects passing between Earth and the Sun. An earthquake on the island of Ischia off Naples was attended by a tumultuous sea. Earthquakes in southern Turkey and Russia dislodged great chunks of ice from off Mount Ararat. Turks exploring the region after the quakes discovered the ancient prow of a gigantic ship protruding from a high glacier. The Turkish government investigated and officially announced the discovery of Noah's Ark, which made major headlines in the United States. This was the exact site of Noah's Ark according to Flavius Josephus in his Antiquities. On the Indonesian island of Krakatoa, the volcano Anak exploded with a force of 200 megaton bombs, which excavated a hole at the bottom of the Pacific 1,900 feet deep and ejected 6-foot boulders as far as 25 miles into the atmosphere. The eruption of Krakatoa was the loudest sound ever heard by man, a thunderous detonation heard as far as 3,000 miles away. The shockwave and accompanying earthquake were felt around the world. The blast sent a tidal wave 100 foot high over areas of Java and Sumatra, destroying almost 300 towns and killing about 36,000 people. Volcanic ash left a dust veil around the entire world for years, darkening the earth and making the winters more severe. While volcanic ash was definitely thrust into the atmosphere, another reason for the spectacular sunsets and colder winters was the blanketing of Earth in a cosmic dust veil, first reported in February and March, 6 months prior to the Anak explosion. In November was seen a strange comet-like object with 2 tails. 1. Exodus. Secret Places of the Lion. 2. Our Haunted Planet. 3. Cataclysm. 4. Secrets of Nostradamus. 5. The First Genesis. 6. In Search of Noah's Ark. 8. civilization or barbarism? 9. Book of the Damned. 1884 AD, 5778 AM. In the 1056th year since England's first king was enthroned, in 828 AD, the Greenwich Observatory in England was chosen as the 0-degree prime meridian, longitudinal, despite the vehement protests of Astronomer Royal for Scotland, Charles Piazzi Smyth, who argued correctly that the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt was the original pre-flood 0-degree true geodesic marker of the Old World. All longitudinal lines should be reckoned by the location of Giza, for the structure was recognised in antiquity as the, quote, middle of the Earth's, unquote, geographical landmasses. In Washington, D.C., the Internation Meridian Conference officially set the prime meridian of longitude for the Earth through Greenwich, England. The French sculptor in this year finished the Statue of Liberty in France, his name being Frederick Auguste Bartholdi. Also, the Washington Monument was erected at 555 foot high, 6660 inches, a gigantic obelisk emblematic of the United States pedigree as the descendants of the Israelites of ancient Egypt. Atop the obelisk in Washington, D.C. is a pyramid of 13 courses of bricks that symbolise the 13 colonies that became the USA, while also symbolising the 13 tribes of Ephraim, Israel. This is the 108th year of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Also in 1884, the first steel-framed superstructures herald the age of the skyscraper. This year was 3,330 years after the exodus of Israel from Egypt, or 666 times 5 years. Interestingly, this year is 156 years to the 2040 AD global disasters caused by planet Phoenix, or 1872 months, this being 144 times 13. Astronomers report that a Mercury-sized planet or object passed through the inner solar system. The Smithsonian Bureau of Ethnology reported the discovery of a stone structure in a mound in Kanawha County, West Virginia, that yielded the remains of a skeleton measuring 7 foot 6 inches tall with a 19-inch chest. A large mound near Gasterville, PA, was excavated, and found within was a vault carved with unknown inscriptions containing a huge 7 foot 2 inch human skeleton. Fossils of human and human giants were excavated from a cavern coal mine in Pas-de-Calais, France. Found also were cave pictures of humans fighting gigantic monsters. The Cunard liner Etruria was built, the largest ship in the world. On November the 6th, near the Russian frontier at Katowice, the first International Assembly of Jews met, from many nations and backgrounds, determined to work in concert to colonise Palestine. This is 186 years to the resurrection event in 2070 AD, the end of the 3,000 years that began in 931 BC, with the split between Israel and Judah, when Israel and Judah will be reunited. 1. The treasure of René Le Chateau, a mystery solved. 2. Lost cities of North and Central America. 4. Secret cities of Old South America. 5. Iron Curtain over America. 1885 AD, 5779 AM. The Washington Monument is formally dedicated in a ceremony. A volcanic island, Falcon Island, emerged from the sea. Neville discovered an inscription that proves that the site he had been excavating was indeed the ancient Egyptian treasure city of Pithom, famous in the Bible. At midnight on February the 24th, at latitude 37 north and longitude 170 east between Yokohama and Victoria, the captain and crew of the Inowitch noticed the sky turn red in a matter of minutes, before, quote, all at once a large mass of fire appeared over the vessel, completely blinding the spectators, unquote. The fiery mass fell into the sea, its size judged by the amount of displaced water, which almost knocked over the ship. On August 27th, a large triangular vessel was seen flying through the skies, stopping in mid-air slowly and then gently increasing in speed as it vanished high into the sky. 1. Ages in Chaos, Volume 1. 2. Book of the Damned. 1886 AD, 5780 AM. World-famous Coca-Cola was first sold at Jacob's Pharmacy in Atlanta, Georgia. The Statue of Liberty was sent by ship to New York City from Rouen, France, in 214 packing crates, and the statue is placed in New York Harbour on Bedloe Island, formerly owned by Jacob Bedloe. The statue was dedicated in 1886, exactly 3672 years, 1224 times 3, this being exactly half of the entire Great Pyramid timeline, from 5239 BC to 2106 AD, being 7344 years after the birth of Jacob, who becomes Israel. The statue is dedicated and constructed with 168 steps inside it from base to head, and then there are 54 rungs of a ladder leading up through the arm of the torch. These steps and rungs add up to 222. This architecture constructed in 1884 AD, exactly 222 years before 2106 AD, when the chief cornerstone defeats the Anunnaki at Armageddon for the deliverance of humanity. 168 steps years from 1884 is the year 2052 AD, when the seven kings of the Anunnaki return via the dark satellite and reign over mankind in a global empire, the subject of Descent of the Seven Kings. This empire will endure for 54 years until it is crushed by the Saviour. The 54 rungs lead up to the torch held by Lady Liberty, or more anciently, Lady Semiramis, Queen of Babylon. During these 54 years, mankind will lose all their liberties and be reduced to slaves of the Anunnaki until they are defeated by the light of the world in 2106 AD, the torch. Also in this year, the Slavonic Enoch text is discovered from the archives of the Belgrade Public Library, entitled The Secrets of Enoch. This further demonstrates the prophetic value of the Enochian writings, which claim that in the last days they would be discovered and translated into the known languages of the world. The Enochian books both tell of the Watchers Anunnaki, who rebelled against God, enslaved mankind, and would lose a war against their maker. The Statue of Liberty was erected in the 260th year since New Amsterdam was taken by the British from the Dutch and renamed New York in 1626, 260 years being 52 times 5. This year marks the last official sighting of a large moon-like object near Venus, first seen and recorded in 1645. The Apache chief Geronimo was captured, ending his war against the United States. By this date, since around 1867, almost 500,000 Swedes had migrated to the United States and Canada. Brazilian slaves in the Paraíba province discovered a Phoenician text concerning a 2-year voyage from the Red Sea involving 10 ships that rounded Africa and by storms landed in Brazil, quote, in the 19th year of Hiram, our mighty king, unquote. This would have been approximately 1,000 years before the birth of Christ. Having diligently studied the prophetic records of the Bible and world history, Dr. Grattan Guinness predicted that in, quote, the year 1917, Jerusalem would be delivered, unquote. This is incredible, for in 1917, Jerusalem was indeed delivered by the British from the Turks. 1. Alice in Wonderland and the World Trade Center disaster. 2. Cataclysm. 3. March of the Titans. 4. The Lost Treasure of King Juba. 5. Andrew Adams, quoted by William Dankenbring in Prophecy Flash, Volume 23. 1888 AD, 5782 AM. The Eiffel Tower was erected in France, becoming the tallest building in the world. Before its erection, the Great Pyramid had remained the tallest structure made by men, at 481 feet high. Obelisks are not structures but solid masonry pillars. Eastman and Walker invent the Kodak camera. The French launched their first submarine Gymnote, a 30-ton vessel propelled by electricity. On August 14th, it rained a shower of ink, a black rain over the Cape of Good Hope. A terrible blizzard froze the eastern United States, killing 400 people. An immense quantity of pebbles rained upon Palestine, Texas. Mine Invisible Residence, 2. Cataclysm. 1889 AD, 5783 AM. Comet Brook neared Jupiter and fragmented. Thomas Edison invented the modern motion picture, then in 1895 invented the motion picture projector. Daimler of Germany invented the gasoline automobile. 1. Cataclysm. 1890 AD, 5784 AM. In the month of May, a substance like blood rained out of the sky over Messingia, Calabria. Samples were taken and sent to Rome, where specialists determined that it was indeed blood. In the following month, June, hail of ice mixed with sandstone pebbles rained over France. This is exactly 1800 months, 150 years before May, 2040 AD, when planet Phoenix will transit and the moon will turn red like blood, as depicted in Revelation 6, and the earth will be blanketed in a reddish cloud of cosmic dust. That blood is drifting frozen through space indicates that a previously inhabitable world, stocked and teeming with biological life forms, was destroyed, quick frozen and fragmented. On October 26th, a comet-like object moving at an incredible speed covered 100 degrees of the sky in 45 minutes, as observed from Grahamstown. The Battle of Wounded Knee is the last major military conflict in North America between the Indians and the United States. In 1890 was the very first recorded crop circle formation, witness being created by people who saw beams of light from the sky create the agroglyphs. In The Unknown Life of Jesus, published by Russian Nicholas Notovich, who had discovered the Buddhist legend of Isa, which claims that a wise man from Palestine lived in the Orient and India from 13 to 29 years old, brought this story to the attention of the Western world. Notovich's conclusion was that this sage was Jesus. 1. Book of the Damned. 3. Freddie Silver, New Dawn Magazine, September-October. 4. Gods of Eden, Bramley. 1891 AD, 5785 AM. The Jews are expelled from Moscow, Russia. This was 26 years before the Jewish Bolshevik takeover of Russia in 1917. On January 20th, an earthquake was preceded by an appearance of a meteorite in the sky over Italy and a rain of small stones. At Crittenden, Arizona, was discovered a stone sarcophagus of a giant who once stood about 12 feet in height and had 6 toes on his feet, according to the carving of the giant on the stone. Other 6-digit giant skeletons were unearthed in 1532 AD. Petroglyphs discovered near Three Rivers, New Mexico, were of hands with 6 fingers. Homo sapiens sapiens, modern humans, are not the only genetic creations of the Anunnaki placed on this planet. 1. Jewish supremacism. 2. Book of the Damned. 3. Lost cities of ancient Lemuria. 4. Elder gods in antiquity. 1892 AD, 5786 AM. On April 4th, a Dutch astronomer named Muller watched black objects pass over the surface of the moon. Professor Barnard, using a 36-inch Lick refractor telescope, discovered a planet beyond Neptune. His discovery would not be made known until 1906, when published in the August edition of the prestigious Nature scientific publication. This sighting was not of Pluto, which is so far and so tiny that even the orbiting Hubble telescope has only given us very blurred images, and the Lick refractor would never have been able to see Pluto. As planet Phoenix was only 10 years away from passing through the inner solar system and approaching, it is likely that Barnard caught a glimpse of Phoenix. This was indeed the 6200th year of the Phoenix chronology, and the fact that this mystery planet is no longer visible means it was an intruder planet and is now gone. This year was 148 years to return of Phoenix in 2040 AD to initiate a global disaster, or 1776 months. 1. Book of the Damned. 2. The Rosicrucian Cosmoconception. 1893 AD, 5787 AM. In October, Comet Brooks was photographed colliding into a dark object in space, the photo published in the 1894 edition of Knowledge. A total eclipse of the Sun on November 30th over Santiago, Chile, allowed tens of thousands of people a few minutes to gaze into the heavens in awe of a mysterious reddish nebulous matter enveloping the Earth. After the nebulous matter passed, and while the Sun was still eclipsed, a dark object passed over the Moon, clearly visible from the surface of the Earth. This serves to demonstrate that objects nearing Earth and passing closely by are virtually invisible to our telescopes on the day side of the planet. 1. Book of the Damned. 2. Cataclysm. 1896 AD, 5790 AM. On June 15th, a submarine earthquake in the Tuscarora deep south of Japan caused the sea to recede, leaving behind stranded fish and animals. Multitudes of people went out to gather the fish and animals for food, but they were overtaken by a 90-foot-high tsunami returning at 450 miles an hour, killing 30,000 people and even washing out entire villages in the higher areas. This is going to occur on a global scale in 144 years, 12 by 12, after 1896, when Phoenix returns in direct transit and causes a pole shift in 2040 AD. Remarkably, A.P. Sinnett in The Growth of the Soul in 1896 announced that there exists 2 more planets in our solar system beyond Neptune. As Pluto is not a planet and so insignificant that Sinnett had to be referring to 2 other planetary-sized bodies, and as Chronicon 1 and 2 bear out significantly, these 2 planets are Phoenix and Nibiru, both due to return in 2040 and 2046. In 1896, the stele of Merneptah was discovered, which records events in year 5 of his reign over Egypt, referring to the earlier conquests of his predecessors over the Hittites, Canaanites, Philistines, Libyans, and the Israelites. On opposite sides of the stele is a text by his predecessor Amenhotep III. The Newberry inscription found inside the roots of an old tree in Michigan proves Old World contact with North America, 3rd century BC Cyprian script. Radioactivity was discovered by Becquerel in France. The Olympic Games were revived with the return of the marathon race, which commemorated the feat of the Athenian runner Philippides, who ran from Marathon to the Spartans to request aid against the Persians. This was exactly 2376 years, 792 times 3, after the Greeks defeated the combined armies of the Persians and Carthaginians in 481 BC. This was the 2208th year, 552 times 4, of the ancient Greek-Syrian Seleucid calendar, and it was the 120th year of the United States of America. 1. The Rosicrucian Cosmoconception. 1897 AD, 5791 AM. Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee, 60 years as Queen of England, was also believed to mark Britain's greatest height of power. A global empire of colonies and countries that emerged during these 60 years that resulted with the internationality of the English language over Africa, India, Borneo, Australia, Cyprus, New Zealand, China, Egypt, the Canadian West, Jamaica, South Africa, the Caribbean, much of the Pacific and numerous other crown colonies. This was 115 years before Queen Elizabeth's Diamond Jubilee in 2012 AD, 115 years being 1380 months, 138 times 10. In 1897, the world's first offshore oil well was drilled off California coast, exactly 108 years before Hurricane Katrina destroyed offshore oil installations in the Gulf of Mexico. A. Smythe Palmer wrote that a textual analysis of Genesis 1 and its relationship to many old Near Eastern tablet records reveals that Moses had access to older writings. Quote, an ancient primeval record of the formation of the world, unquote. Genesis 1 containing words older than the text itself concerning the ruination of a world before Adam. As seen in Chronicon 1, this primeval record was of course the surface text upon the Great Pyramid. Assyriologist Theophilus Pinches brought to the world's attention the Kedorlaomer texts at a lecture in London which describes from ancient annals the Great War of Genesis 14 in explicit detail concerning the Elamite Empire. This was a war that Nimrod and Abraham played prominent roles in. Zionist insiders attending the Jewish World Congress held in Basel spread a Jewish manifesto entitled The Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, a strategic, well-written plan on the domination of the world by Jewish agents and groups. This Jewish supremacism a fundamental teaching in their Talmud. 1. Babylonian influence on religion. 2. The Spear of Destiny. 1898 AD, 5792 AM. The planet Eros is discovered. Morgan Robertson wrote a book entitled Futility, the Wreck of the Titan, a work of fiction that tells of a new gigantic passenger liner called the Titan that in April struck a south-drifting iceberg that sank her. The details of his book were literally fulfilled in 1912 with the sinking of the Titanic. The USS Maine sunk and the Spanish were blamed as a pretext for war, but the vessel had been blown up from within. All 260 US servicemen were killed at Havana, Cuba. The USA blockades Cuba and declares war on Spain. Spain declares Cuban independence, and the US takes Guam and Puerto Rico both from Spain, and in the Pacific, Hawaii is annexed. The Spanish-American War ends with the Treaty of Paris. Falcon Island, first appearing in 1885, disappeared into the sea. The Kensington runestone was discovered by a farmer in Minnesota entangled in the roots of an old tree. The runestone is an inscription left behind by Norse and Goth explorers in 1362 AD, sent by King Magnus of Norway to survey North America, many of whom were attacked and killed by Indians. Archaeologists in Death Valley found the fossilised remains of a giant human female that had stood 7 foot 6 inches tall. In 1898, Dr. H. Aldersmith wrote that Jerusalem would be delivered in 1917, and that, quote, some type of flying machine would play a major role in this deliverance, unquote. This was 5 years before the first successful plane was tested in 1903. In 1917, General Allenby did indeed use airplanes as aerial lookouts against the Turks occupying Jerusalem. 1. Introduction to comets. 2. The world's all wrong. 3. Mysteries of time and space, cited in lost cities of North and Central America. 4. William Dankenbring quoting Andrew Adams' prophecy. Flash, Volume 23. 1898 AD, 57:93 AM. Near Mexico City was unearthed by archaeologists a human skeleton having 2 extra ribs, 26 ribs in all. Genetic anomalies are the signature of Anunnaki manipulation in the distant past. German archaeologists in this year began an extensive and expensive campaign of excavations on the ancient ruins of Babylon that would continue 18 years. This is a grand cross-calendrical parallel, for in 1899 BC the Tower of Babel, a pyramid, was destroyed, and the great dispersion of migrating peoples leaving the Near East was caused by a cataclysm involving the dark satellite. In 1899 BC, Babel, origin of Babylon, was destroyed. In 1899 AD, the ruins of the original Babylon are excavated. 1. Ancient Man, Handbook of Puzzling Artifacts. 2. When Time Began, Aftermath Sitchin. 1900 AD, 57:94 AM. A hurricane destroys Galveston, Texas, killing 12,000 people. Quantum theory is introduced by the German scientist Planck. The Germans are successful in the first flight of their airship Graf Zeppelin. The US Navy launched its first submarine designed by John Holland. Sir Arthur Evans excavates ancient Knossos and discovers a Minoan civilization on Crete. At a depth of 140 feet, among the ruins of a shipwreck off the coast of Crete, sponge divers discover the artefact later to be known as the Antikythera computer, an astronomical device over 2,000 years old. It would not be publicised until 1902. 1. Invisible Residents. 2. 20th Century Events. 1901 AD, 57:95 AM. The scientific establishment begins recording the regularity of natural disasters, floods, droughts, quakes and storms. There is an earthquake in Scotland. The prophet Nostradamus believed that rapid world changes would begin occurring after 1901. US President William McKinley is assassinated and is succeeded by Theodore Roosevelt. The Code of Hammurabi is excavated in this year, the text concerning the laws of ancient Babylon passed down by the Anunnaki. The Cincinnati Astral Society published a list of predictions concerning a gigantic passenger steamliner that would soon sink between Britain and the US, with loss of life due to inadequacy of lifeboats, referring to Titanic, c. 1912. It was also predicted that a new comet would be discovered and that it orbited an unknown planet discovered in 1902, and that soon a global epidemic would occur. 1. Secrets of Nostradamus. 2. Psychic and occult views and reviews. 1902 AD, 57:96 AM. Exactly 138 years, 1656 months, after astronomer Hoffmann studied Phoenix through a telescope in 1764, as it obscures 1/5 of the Sun's surface in a near transit, planet Phoenix returns to the inner solar system with its immense debris field. Comet Morehouse is discovered and is photographed as it breaks up. This is the final pass of Phoenix before it perfectly aligns in total transit in 2040 AD. A bizarre dust rains upon Australia, much of Europe, Western Russia, over Britain, the Atlantic, dust and mud falling from the sky that measured in some areas as much as 50 tonnes per square mile. The extraterrestrial blanketing of cosmic dust was pushed from Phoenix to Earth by solar wind as Phoenix passed between Venus and Earth perpendicular to the ecliptic. This was 6210 of the Phoenix chronology, or 414 times 15 years. This was 4140 years, 414 times 10, after the Great Flood. On the French Caribbean island of Martinique at the city of Saint-Pierre, about 400 miles south of Puerto Rico, a Protestant missionary in March named George Penny visited and distributed Bibles. The city was Catholic and the local clergy were enraged and threatened his life if he did not leave the city. The Bible was confiscated by the Catholic agents and burned in a demonstration in the city square. On the day of Easter, the same Catholic priest sacrificed a pig and tied a Protestant Bible to the dead animal and dragged it through the streets of Saint-Pierre. That night, Mount Pelée began smoking, the tallest mountain on the islands being a volcano. It rumbled continually, and on May the 9th at 7:52 a.m, the top of the mountain exploded. The force of the blast blew over ships in the harbour. A searing hot wavefront of broiling gases incinerated the city, burning alive all 30,000 French Catholic inhabitants and their buildings, as well as most of the ships in the harbour. Only one man on land survived, a prisoner in a basement who had been condemned to die, kept alive in a basement jail cell. The prisoner was named Auguste Silbanis. Martinique had priorly funneled many African slaves into American ports. A volcano at Santa Maria, Guatemala, kills 1,000 people. It was in May, period of the Phoenix transit, that an archaeologist first noticed a metal wheel in a lump of pressed debris that later came to be known as the Antikythera computer. The highly complex device had been excavated from the wreckage under the Mediterranean of a 300-ton ship on its way to Rome, loaded with the plunder from the Third Mithridatic War. It had been sunk about 70 to 60 BC. It was publicly announced that the Antikythera device was indeed a sophisticated geared computer, older than 2,000 years, used to chart astronomical orbital periods of the Moon, Sun and planets, both forward and backward in time. So incredibly complex is the mechanism with its precision-cut differential geared systems that it is evident that the technology required to manufacture the metal computer is more sophisticated than the mechanism itself. The computer was constructed sometime after 713 BC because it employs a 365.25-day year. Zechariah Sitchin remarks that the pointer on the relic may reveal its purpose. The months are described in Greek, and the specialist Dr. Derek de Sola Price calculated that the pointer indicates the date 586 BC. Sitchin believed it is actually closer to 584 BC, but the truth is that the device marks the epic year of 583 BC, when planet Phoenix darkened the sun and had been predicted by Thales of Miletus. In the 1st century BC, according to Cicero, these amazing computer astrolabes existed. Marcus Marcellus possessed a globe which demonstrated the motion of the sun, moon and planets made at Syracuse, Sicily. Cicero claims it was a very ancient invention and that a similar model was at Rome. In fact, Thales of Miletus and Archimedes were believed to be the builders of these devices. That Thales predicted the Phoenix darkening in 585 or 583 BC lends credit to Cicero's assertion. David Hatcher Childress wrote, quote, "What the Antikythera device has shown historians is that the ancient world did in fact have a higher science than we had previously given credit for." Unquote. In 1902, the ancient cuneiform tablets of the Babylonian Enuma Elish were translated into English from the Akkadian. These old texts relate the 4309 BC global cataclysm, when Earth was destroyed and assumed a newer orbit after, quote, "Long were the days, years were added," unquote. The tablet records concern the primordial restoration of Earth as it begins a newer orbit around the Sun. The Enuma Elish texts venerate the Anunnaki. Also in 1902, Fleming's translation of the Ethiopic Book of Enoch is published at Leipzig. Dr. Fleming's translation is based off of 15 ancient manuscripts, is very good and constitutes an immeasurable advance on that of earlier translations. As Enoch was the principal architect of the Great Pyramid complex, we are not surprised that 1902 begins an obscure countdown, the Giza course calendar. As the Great Pyramid is exactly 203 courses of masonry, each level of stone representing a year of time in the last days, 1902 begins a countdown to the year 2105 AD. This is the year 5999 of the Annus Mundi timeline of man's curse. The 6,000th year is the 204th level of the Great Pyramid, which is the chief cornerstone, the stone the builders rejected, the deity that will descend in 6000 AM, 2106 AD, at Armageddon to end the reign of the Anunnaki, who begin ruling over humankind in 2052. Enoch predicted that his own writings would be discovered in the last days and translated in all the languages of the world. The beginning of the book of Enoch reads that the pre-flood prophet, quote, heard everything, and from them the angels explaining the future. I understood what I saw, but not for this generation, but for a remote one which is for to come, unquote. Interestingly, at Paris, France, the first interpretation of the papyrus of Ipuwer was presented. At the time, its relation to the events of the Exodus in 1447 BC was unknown. The Exodus took place in 2448 Annus Mundi, 1447 BC, and in Chronicon 1 it was shown that 2448 was the ancient Egyptian number for cataclysm. 1902 AD is 204 years to Armageddon in 2106 AD, or 2448 months. This 204 years was mentioned by the priest-prophet Ezra, who called them the 204 books, the reference to books being any container of knowledge. Concerning the Great Pyramid, the successor of Auguste Mariette of the Egyptian Antiquities Service, Gaston Maspero, organised a multinational coalition of missions that would in different groups excavate the Giza complex and Sphinx, as well as other temple pyramid sites. As 1902 AD begins the last days, here are other notable highlights for this year. Sir Norman Lockyer's research on Stonehenge complete, measurements made in 1901, in his work titled Stonehenge and Other British Stone Monuments, wherein he relates that the monument was erected for astronomical purposes. In Chronicon 1 it is shown that Stonehenge was repaired after 2239 BC, when ruined in the Great Flood, and again in 1687 BC global cataclysm, both caused by planet Phoenix. The hypogeum discovered on Malta, galleries and chambers of rock carved out of limestone dating from the 1687 BC Phoenix destruction. The Great Seal of the United States of America with the Phoenix is recast to look like an eagle. Manly P. Hall related that the image is a highly conventionalized phoenix, which is easily found when comparing it to the original seal. The US Census Bureau established to measure and keep records on the United States population, this being 144 years before the cataclysm in 2046 AD that depopulates North America. The Fuller Building in New York City is the world's first skyscraper at 21 stories. The Great Pyramid is 41 stories high. Fuller Building is one-of-a-kind architecture shaped like a triangle, like a wedge between Fifth Avenue and Broadway. In 138 years at the Phoenix Transit, the world's skyscrapers will be destroyed. Carrier in the United States invents air conditioning. England mourned the death of Queen Victoria, her reign long recognised as the height of British international power, her death emblematic of England's decline. George Hagopian, an Armenian, was taken up to the summit of Mount Ararat in Turkey, at a time when the ice cap was greatly diminished. He personally beheld the remains of a gigantic wooden ship constructed of vast timbers, so old they were virtually petrified. His descriptions matched the reports of others on the structure's colour, dimensions, architectural features and location, at over 12,000 feet elevation entombed in ice. It must be recalled that this was 4140 years after the flood, 414 times 10, when the Ark landed on Mount Ararat and stuck. Arthur James Balfour is made Prime Minister of Great Britain, on through 1905. His Jewish pedigree is kept secret. He was the force behind the Balfour Declaration that declared Jewish settlement rights in Palestine. Co-masonry begins in America, allowing women to join the order. Mrs. Anne Besant is the First Lady initiated into the Masons. In England in this year, the first co-masonry lodge is consecrated. The modernist movement among scholars originates this year, threatening the very foundations of the official church, as historians dug deep into Christian histories and exposed forgeries, falsified documents and many interpolations into secular writings from antiquity, committed by the church translators and copyists. Roman Catholic supremacy was threatened, and in response to the brilliant works of scholars bringing to light these fallacies, Pope Leo XIII created the Pontifical Biblical Commission to oversee the works of theological scholars, to make sure they did not stray from the teachings of the official church, papal censorship. 20,000 Irishmen in Phoenix Park, Dublin, demonstrated against the British government. Pepsi-Cola founded in the United States. The Aswan Dam in Egypt was completed after 4 years construction. City of Washington, D.C. planned out and capital scheme reworked, employing Mason designs. On October 28th at 3:05 a.m, sailors aboard the SS Fort Salisbury in the Gulf of Guinea in the South Atlantic observed a dark, apparently scaled object, about 600 feet long, positioned several hundred feet away from their vessel. The long object slowly descended into the water and submerged in the ocean. Descending quietly from the sky, it disturbed the water strangely upon contact. It had a light at each end. The SS Bannockburn vanished in November 1902 on Lake Superior, after departing Port Arthur, Ontario, with a cargo of 85,000 bushels of wheat. The steamer Algonquin spotted her, and the captain noted it, telling his mates to have a look at the majestic cargo ship. But a moment later it was reported that the Bannockburn was not there. It had vanished. The men of the Algonquin noted that she could not have sunk that fast nor moved away. Later that night a storm rolled over Lake Superior, and the SS Chronicon reported strange lights over the lake. These lights seen also from the beaches of Rossport and Schreiber. A massive search was conducted for the Bannockburn, with tugboats combing the lake. Captain George Woods and his 22 men disappeared without a trace. Scientific surveys probed Lake Superior in 1976 and again in 2002, but the vessel is not in Lake Superior. November 21 has vanished without a trace. In 1994, members of the Italian National Library in Rome discovered buried in the archives a formerly unknown and unpublished manuscript, fully illustrated with paintings and text by the prophet Nostradamus. After studying the prophecies, Roman researcher and Nostradamus expert Ottavio Cesare Ramotti published in his book, Nostradamus, the Lost Manuscript, that the following passage of Nostradamus refers to the year 1903 AD. Quote, "Many will die before the phoenix dies, until 670 his dwelling shall endure." Unquote. As shown in Nostradamus and the Planets of Apocalypse, and When the Sun Darkens, both by this author, this date referred to by the French prophet of Jewish ancestry was 1902 AD. 1. Cataclysm. 3. The Antediluvian World. Great Disasters. 4. William Dankenbrink, Prophecy Flash Volume 21. 5. The Poison King. 6. Journeys to the Mythical Past. 7. Technology of the Gods. 9. Charles, Book of Enoch. 10. Enoch 1-2. 11. Ages in Chaos, Volume 1. 12. The Great Pyramids, Cortegiani. 13. The Secret Teachings of All Ages. 14. In Search of Noah's Ark. 15. Freemasonry and its Ancient Mystic Rites. 16. The Jesus Papers. 17. 20th Century Events. 19. Invisible Residents. 20. Nostradamus, the Lost Manuscript. 1903 AD, 5797 AM. The Jewish Bolshevik Party gains the majority in Russia due to a split at the London Conference of the Russian Social Democratic Party. Henry Ford founded the Ford Motor Company in the USA. Orville and Wilbur Wright succeeded in the first manned airplane flight test at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. This fulfills an ancient prophecy that in the last days, quote, men will fly, unquote. In the USA, the first World Series in baseball is won by the Boston Red Sox. Comet Borrelli is photographed during a disconnection event, a large fragment breaking away. The Lowell Observatory reported seeing a cloud-like object near Mars. 1. 20th century events. 2. Esdras 520. 4. Introduction to comets. 5. Book of the Damned. 1904 AD, 5798 AM. A meteorite collided into Alta, Norway. The surviving fragment weighed 198 pounds. America's 4 billion chestnut trees died in a mysterious blight, a fungus. The fortuitous discovery of 6 old chestnut trees in 2006 has baffled botanists. The Japanese Navy unexpectedly attacked the Russian Port Arthur and then defeated a Russian army, declaring war against Russia over Korea and Manchuria. The New York subway opens and 150,000 people use the system on the first day. The Behistun rock inscription of King Darius of Persia is re-investigated by the British Museum, an ancient Persian reference to post-captivity Israelites. 1. 2007 Almanca. 2. 20th century events. 3. The decline of the West. 1905 AD, 5799 AM. After a 12-day battle, the Japanese defeat the Russians at Mukden, and then the Russian Baltic Fleet is defeated by the Japanese in the Battle of Tsushima Straits. An unsuccessful revolution heavily financed by Russian Jews fails. In the aftermath, some 600 villages and cities in the country attacked their Jewish inhabitants. Many Jews fled to Western Europe and America. A quake at Kangra, India, killed 20,000. Albert Einstein of Germany published his theory of general relativity concerning the relationships between time and space and how we perceive them. 1. March of the Titans. 1906 AD, 5800 AM. A typhoon kills over 10,000 people in Hong Kong, China. Mount Vesuvius erupted in Italy, killing 1,000 people. On April 18th, 108th day of the year, at 5:13 AM, a powerful earthquake struck San Francisco, California, rippling up the streets and felling buildings in the cosmopolitan city of 450,000 people. Known as the San Francisco Horror, the quake and subsequent burning destroyed 28,188 buildings. The quake also damaged the California coastal cities 50 miles north and south of San Francisco. Remarkably, for such widespread property damage and fires, the fatalities were very low. The Russian revolutionary Leon Trotsky was exiled to Siberia for his insurgent activities. Most historians prefer not to reveal his true identity. He was born as Lev Bronstein and was Jewish. It was even known that he had played chess with Baron Rothschild. 1. The complete story of the San Francisco Horror. 3. Jewish supremacism. 1907 AD, 5801 AM. A terrific explosion is heard over Burlington, Vermont, and a meteorite is seen in the sky. Some witnesses claim to have seen an unusual cigar-shaped object flying in the sky like a zeppelin. Concerning the communist revolution in Russia, an attempt to overthrow the Russian monarchy, the prestigious National Geographic magazine in its May edition wrote, quote, "The revolutionary leaders nearly all belong to the Jewish race, and the most effective revolutionary agency is the Jewish Bund. The government has suffered more from that race than from all its other subjects combined. Whenever a desperate deed is committed, it is always done by a Jew, and there is scarcely one loyal member of that race in the entire empire." Unquote. 1. Book of the Damned. 2. Jewish supremacism. 1908 AD, 5802 AM. A bright comet flashed over Asia, witnessed by thousands before exploding in the sky over Tunguska, Siberia, damaging forests up to 300 miles away, with the blast being heard 600 miles away. People 100 miles away were knocked off their feet. The pressure of the blast affected barometers in England, and sunsets for weeks were very beautiful due to atmospheric dust. The blasts knocked down hundreds of thousands of large trees, and iridium levels measured in the area revealed that the object that exploded had weighed about 7 million tonnes. This comet exploded on June 30th. Had the blast occurred over any major city, that city would have been totally destroyed. Meteorologists recorded increased frequency and intensity of the northern lights, another inexplicable atmospheric phenomena. Starting in June, there was already noted unusual atmospheric activity over Europe, Russia, Siberia, all before the Tunguska blast, like the appearance of silvery mesospheric clouds, bright twilights, and extremely intense and long solar halos, all increasing in intensity for 10 days. The blast was seismically recorded in Irkutsk, Turkey, Tashkent, Tbilisi, and Jena. Just 3 days after the June 30th explosion in Siberia, on July 2nd, thunder was heard in a blue sky without clouds over Braemar, a bright and sunny day when pieces of ice fell out of the sky. This was exactly a year to the day of July 2nd, when the sky rumbled and a meteorite was seen over Vermont in 1907. On December 28th at 5:20 am, a major earthquake rocked Messina, Sicily, followed by a tsunami 26 foot high that wreaked destruction throughout the city and pulled many people out to sea as the waters receded. Gas lines burst and fires burned throughout, making the total death toll to be at 120,000 people. This year is 138 years, 1656 months, to 2046 AD cataclysms, and 132 years, 792 plus 792 months, to the 2040 AD disasters, and 132 years after America declared its independence in 1776. An international group of bankers and allied politicians, J.P. Morgan, John D. Rockefeller, Senator Nelson Aldrich, and Paul Warburg, convened in a secret meeting at the Jekyll Island Hunt Club in Georgia and drafted a plan that would allow them to cleverly acquire ownership of the United States currency. Behind the operation was the internationalist banking Rothschild dynasty. This scheme is in full operation today, called the Federal Reserve System, though it is not federal but privately owned, nor is it a reserve. On December 23rd, when most of the Congress was home for Christmas, the conspirators passed it into law. Now foreign powers control the US economy. In the USA, the Federal Bureau of Investigation is set up. The Ford Motor Company introduced to the public the Model T automobile. In Egypt, archaeologist Navil's finding at Pithom concerning the straw content and evidence that this was a biblically famous city built by the ancient slave Israelites was confirmed by Kyle. 1. The Great Disasters. 2. Book of the Damned. 4. The Great Conspiracy. 5. Secret Places of the Lion. 1909 AD, 5803 AM. Alan H. Gardiner translated the ancient Egyptian Ipuwer text of the Leiden Museum that details an Egyptian version of the plagues over Egypt and total ruin of the country in 1447 BC, Exodus event, even mentioning that relics were removed from the pyramids. In Egypt, the first underground temple complex near Giza was discovered and excavated. Jewish financiers create the NAACP in the USA, or National Association for the Advancement of Coloured People, their original goal being to promote interracial mixing between whites and blacks. Insiders in American government and the House of Representatives documented the fact that all of the NAACP's founders were communist activists. For the first 60 years of the NAACP, every president of the NAACP was Jewish, until finally in the 1970s, an African American was given the post. Also in this year, Russian troops invaded Persia, Iran, in support of the Shah as the insurgents were trying to topple him. 1. Dr. Klaus Ulrich Groth, More Egyptian Underground Secrets Revealed. 1910 AD, 5804 AM. Halley's Comet was photographed for the first time. The apparition is very visible and exhibits 5 tails. In a cave accessed by a long narrow crevasse in the Grand Canyon of Arizona was discovered a limestone fossil of a giant woman sitting back against a wall beside an infant wrapped in skins, all petrified. The local Supai people knew of her for a long time and called her Very Big Woman Long Time Dead. 1. End of Eden. 2. Secret Cities of Old South America. 1911 AD, 5805 AM. The Republic of China is founded in the 135th year of the United States of America from 1776. This is also 135 years to the end of the United States in 2046 AD, when China emerges as a dominant power. The isolated and abandoned lost city of Machu Picchu was found. Not even the Spanish explorers had found the remote city. Modern archaeologists are given the first major find of pre-Columbian antiquity to study. Italy attacks and occupies Libya. As shown in Chronicon 1 in the 16th to 15th centuries BC, the Italians, Chittim, and Libyans were constantly at war. 1912 AD, 5806 AM. China adopted the Gregorian calendar of the Western world. Mount Katmai in Alaska erupted, destroying 50 square miles of forest. The White Star steamship RMS Titanic was advertised around the world as being unsinkable, the largest passenger vessel ever built at 883 feet in length. On its maiden voyage in April, the luxury liner struck an iceberg that drifted unusually late in the year, further south in the Atlantic than was normal. 1,503 people died. In 1898, in the novel Futility, we find that the fictional Titan was the largest luxury liner ever built, loaded with the rich and famous at over 800 feet long, with a triple-screw propulsion that displaced 66,000 tonnes of water, a vessel having not near enough lifeboats. The Titan carried 3,000 passengers, travelled 24 to 25 knots, and although in Futility the Titan was advertised as unsinkable, it struck an iceberg and sank in the Atlantic with horrific loss of life. The movie Titanic, as of 2007, was the highest grossing movie ever produced. An intensely black object measuring approximately 250 miles long and 50 miles wide passed over the surface of the moon as seen from Earth. On April 8th, just days before the Titanic launched from England, Charles Tilden Smith in Wiltshire, England, near Stonehenge, saw two triangular-shaped UFOs concealed in rapidly moving clouds. The continuous stream of clouds moved, but the darker triangular objects within remained fixed at the same location in the sky for more than half an hour. 1. Edgar Casey Readers. 2. Book of the Damned. 1913 AD, 5807 AM. Congressman Charles Lindbergh stated that with the passing of the Federal Reserve Act, that the invisible government of monetary power over America was born, the greatest crime against the Republic. This privately owned reserve is owned by the Rothschilds. President Woodrow Wilson is the first American president in 112 years to deliver the State of the Union address in person to Congress. President Wilson's first presidential act was to segregate all federal facilities in the American capital. In February over North America was seen from the United States and Canada as far as Bermuda a train of meteorite-like objects that passed over 30 miles above the Earth. This is over 7,000 times closer than the Moon. It appeared as a luminous body with a long tail that became a train of objects moving rapidly by Earth. It was in fragments and they, quote, moved with a particular majestic, dignified deliberation. It appeared in the distance and another group emerged from its place of origin, unquote. Many describe these 30 to 32 objects passing through the upper atmosphere as a fleet of battleships attended by cruisers and destroyers. On April 8th, exactly a year after the April 8th sighting of the triangular-shaped UFOs over Wiltshire, the shadow of an object was seen passing over the moon from Fort Worth, Texas. Charles Fabry demonstrated that ozone in the upper atmosphere filters out damaging ultraviolet radiation. R.H. Charles released his finished translation of the Book of Enoch in English with commentary. In a novel entitled The World Set Free, H.G. Wells wrote that all of Europe with America would be plunged into a world war in the middle of the 20th century, and that atomic bombs would be used, this being decades before atomic technology was begun, and 25 years before World War II started. The world's largest airship, the Zeppelin L-2, explodes in Germany, killing all 28 crewmen. 1. Synagogue of Satan. 3. March of the Titans. 4. Cataclysm. 5. Book of the Damned. 7. Human Accomplishment. 1914 AD, 5808 AM. A huge asteroid comet passes over the ecliptic in the inner solar system on its journey to collide in the North American continent in 2046 AD. Japanese volcano Sakurajima erupted, burying many buildings. Ford's Model T automobile dominates the industry. Swinton in England invents the modern military tank. World War One. On June 28th, Archduke Franz Ferdinand with his wife, the Duchess Sophia, was assassinated in Sarajevo by a Serbian assassin. This assassination was used as a pretext for war, though in truth, the major players seeking a world war did not like Ferdinand, and few countries even sent ambassadors to attend his funeral. The Germans were largely unconcerned with events so far away in Bosnia and the Balkans, though they expressed that the Serbians should be punished, which was exactly what the Austrians wanted. Austria demanded an official apology from Serbia and threatened invasion, but Russia and France mobilised to protect Serbia from Austrian invasion. Austria and Hungary declare war on Serbia, and Germany declares war on Russia for mobilising against Austria. Then Germany declares war on France. When Germany invades Belgium, Britain declares war on Germany. The Germans take Brussels and invade France, and Japan declares war on Germany. The Germans defeat the Russians at Tannenberg, and the Germans conduct air raids on Paris, causing the French government to evacuate. French and British expeditionary forces block the German advance in September at the Battle of Marne. Then the Germans defeated the Russians at Masurian Lakes, East Prussia, and Germans in Belgium are blocked at the First Battle of Ypres, beginning trench warfare. Russia declared war against Turkey, followed by Britain and France. The British Royal Navy fleet defeats a German fleet near the Falkland Islands. On Christmas Day, a hitherto unprecedented event occurred on the battlefields of Europe. The Germans and the British and French they were fighting against met one another between their trench emplacements to talk, drink and sing Christmas carols, pray and offer goodwill. This amazing spirit reveals the dark origins of the war itself, a banking war that was premeditated, needing only a pretext. As shown abundantly in Chronicon 1, the origin of the British, the French and the Germans with most of the European population was directly from the post-captivity migrations of the 10 tribes of ancient Israelites, moving ever further and further north and west. In its historical context, World War I was a civil war, a mutual slaughter. 1914 AD was exactly 3360 years after the exodus of Israel from Egypt, in 1447 BC. 24:48 AM. The length 3360 being the longest ascendant pyramid inch length in the internal arrangement of the Great Pyramid as shown in chronotecture. Even more remarkable is the fact that 1914 was 3552 years after 1639 BC, when Jacob adopted Ephraim and Manasseh, the sons of Joseph in Egypt, into the family of Israel. These men would have offspring that would one day become the British and American empires. This World War I date was also 2520 years, 360 times 7, after 607 BC, when Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon defeated the Assyrians, allowing many Israelite peoples, Cimmerians, to escape into the Balkans. World War I did not begin as a German war of conquest. In the years leading up to World War I between 1900 to 1912, Germany remained passive as England, France and other European nations were conquering others. Germany even declined a Franco-Russian offer to attack England. Even when Russia or France entered a pact against Germany, the Germans still neglected to attack the French when Russia suffered internal revolution and defeat by Japan. Historians seeking to paint Germany in the darkest colours, many years after the fact, are those who have propagated the myth that the world wars were initiated by German plans for world conquest. After winning these wars, this is what the victors have published over and over. In the 1880s, the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, quote, "Within 50 years these Babel governments, the democracies of Europe, will clash in a gigantic war for the markets of the world." Unquote. Paramount Pictures in Hollywood was established. The overpopulated cities of Europe in this year saw a mass exodus of whole families. 9 million migrated to the United States. A total of 70 million migrated away from Europe. They went to Siberia, Canada, Argentina, Australia, South Africa and Algeria, all migrating within the century that ended with World War I. The Panama Canal officially opened, connecting by sea the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. 1914 AD was the 138th year, 1656 months being 414 times 4 of the United States. 1. The Gospel Truth. 2. The Spear of Destiny. 4. The Story of Philosophy. 1915 AD, 5809 AM. World War I continues unabated. Britain and Germany fight a series of naval battles and German U-boats terrorise the Atlantic. The Germans announce to European nations and to the United States that they will attack any vessels travelling to aid Britain in the war. The US knows this, knows that German spies know that they have loaded the British liner Lusitania with war munitions and supplies in an American harbour. The Lusitania is sunk by a German U-boat submarine off Ireland's coast, killing 1,198 people, 128 of them being Americans. As so often is done by the United States, incidents at sea are fabricated to incite the American people to war. Unfortunately for Alfred Vanderbilt of Gainesville, Texas, he died aboard the Lusitania after having had a ticket for the Titanic that he had missed due to a late arrival. The Germans and French engaged in the Battle of Verdun, the longest World War I conflict that resulted in 550,000 French casualties and 434,000 German casualties. Alfred Wegener published his Pangaea theory about continental drift and the prehistoric supercontinent. Professor Barnard studied the strange region of space around the constellation Cepheus and discovered a vast black object near the star Algol, the ghoul or blinking demon. Algol was considered by the ancients to be the most evil of all stars. Cepheus is located in the northern circumpolar sphere, far off the ecliptic, and Algol is one of the very hottest stars, a blue-white dwarf approximately 36,000 degrees. Algol is the eye of Medusa. Professor Barnard witnessed a vast dark object that later he described as a dark nebula, after he was scorned by the astronomical community. In 1915 there was no knowledge of dark stars, compressed or frozen stars and black holes. Modern astronomers are convinced that our Sun has a twin, many calling her a dark star, Nemesis. This 1915 AD date parallels the 1915 BC year of the appearance of the Anunnaki planet Nibiru, remembered in Egypt and the Near East as Typhon. In 1915 the Ku Klux Klan re-emerges in America in the state of Georgia. 1. Book of the Damned. 2. The Atlas of the Constellations. 3. 20th Century Events. 1916 AD, 58:10 AM. The British Army launches a major offensive in the First Battle of Somme, and in the first day of the battle suffers 57,470 casualties against the Germans, 19,240 of these men dying. Germany announces that it is ready to conclude peace, but the Allies refuse. On September 29th, J.D. Rockefeller becomes the world's first billionaire. The British Expeditionary Force sent to the continent to aid their French allies at Mons were on the verge of collapse from hunger, exhaustion and decimation. After news reached England of their plight, the Germans steadily pressing against them, English King George V called for a national day of prayer and fasting. The call evidently did not go unheeded in heaven. During the height of the fighting amidst the battle that was sure to be won by the Germans, the machine gun fire and cannons suddenly stopped, vehicles stopped and mortars were silenced. A silence prevailed, causing the badly pressed British and French holdouts to emerge from their trenches to stand in awe of the sight before them. Moving rapidly away, the German army was retreating, leaving behind weapons and vehicles. Captured German officers were found terrified, describing tall men wearing all white that suddenly appeared and advanced against them, strange men who were unhurt by their guns and cannons. The incident that saved the British Expeditionary Force has since been called the Angels of Mons. In the Second Battle of Somme, the French and Germans engaged in a battle that resulted in 1 million casualties. Russian aviator Vladimir Rokovitsky, stationed in a small unit camp 25 miles from Mount Ararat, saw a huge dark structure half submerged in a meltwater lake toward the summit of Mount Ararat in Turkey, a unique mountain having a plateau at 12,000 feet elevation. Thinking this colossal object looked like a large submarine, and knowing that this conclusion in itself was ridiculous because of its location, he flew over the site many times and discovered it to be a gigantic ship designed as if it was intended for huge ocean waves to roll right over it. He declared that it was as large as a modern battleship, as long as a city block, and with distinct catwalks. It had an immense doorway on its side, and the great structure was damaged, half submerged in a snow-surrounded lake. He later flew his commanding officer to the site, one in search of Noah's Ark. 1917 AD, 58:11 AM. The Tsar of Russia, having heard the incredible report of the aviators from Mount Ararat, understood the import of the find and immediately dispatched about 200 Russians who ascended Mount Ararat in two groups. The research teams and soldiers found the Ark, drew meticulous illustrations, made measurements and took photographs of hundreds of small rooms, some with high ceilings large enough to hold creatures 10 times the size of elephants. The scientists and soldiers made it back to Russia in time for the tragic Bolshevik Revolution, when the Tsar and his family were confined and later murdered. All of the Ararat files vanished, and the aviators escaped to the United States to tell of their account. Their stories later corroborated by researchers who interrogated the families of some of the Russian soldiers in the area of Ararat. The American Expeditionary Force landed in France as 1 million US servicemen and support personnel caused Germany to sue for peace in 1918. Mata Hari, a seductress believed to be a Dutch spy, was killed by a French firing squad. British General Allenby takes Jerusalem from the Turks. In the 400th year of Ottoman occupation of Jerusalem since 1517 AD. This British administration of Jerusalem began 670 years after the Egyptian Muslims took Jerusalem in 1247. Allenby used aircraft flying over Jerusalem as reconnaissance, fulfilling prophecies that declared that Jerusalem would be delivered in 1917 by men as birds flying. To the amazement of the British, the Turks, who were in force and set in to defend Jerusalem, suddenly panicked and retreated, surrendering the holy city. All night long, soldiers, commanding officers, and even prisoners of war had witnessed throngs of glowing beings in the air. There were so many cross-referenced eyewitness accounts, the army issued a paper attributing to mass hallucinations. British Foreign Secretary James Arthur Balfour creates the Balfour Declaration, which recognises Palestine as the Israeli state. This year is the year 1335 of the Islamic Hijra calendar, the Arabic lunar system, but the 1295th year of the solar Anno Domini system. The disparity between the lunar and solar calendar by this time is a biblical generation of 40 years. This 1335 lunar years involving the fall of Muslim rule over the Holy City and rise of the Judaic state is what was referred to by the angelic messenger speaking to Daniel the prophet concerning the 1335 days when the Judahites would inherit the lots of their land. Egyptian coins of 1917 have two dates minted side by side, the Muslim lunar year of 1335 and the Anno Domini year 1917. The Bolshevik Revolution occurs in Russia, known ever afterward as Red October. Earlier in the year, the revolutionists attempted an overthrow of the government at Petrograd, but failed. The revolution and Russian takeover was planned by Jewish Zionists for over 60 years. Vladimir Lenin overthrew the government of Alexander Kerensky. The Bolsheviks stormed the Winter Palace in Petrograd, and the formerly exiled Jew Leon Trotsky, real name Lev Bronstein, was appointed Russian Prime Minister. The Bolshevik Revolution was a total Jewish takeover, whose chief financier was the Zionist Jacob Schiff. The National Archives of the United States reveals that the new Bolshevik government of Russia had only 13 ethnic Russians and over 300 Jews. The royal Romanov family were confined and then killed. The media has since that day claimed over and over again that the Russian people murdered their own monarchical family because they had been oppressed, but it is now known that the royal Russian family were all murdered by the Jews Sverdlov, Golishkin, Siromolotov, Sarafov, Voykov and Yurovsky. From this point on, the leaders of the Russian people are not patriotic Russians, but renegades with international ties to the global Zionist network operating behind the scenes of all the major industrialised nations. The Christian Russians found themselves under the yoke of anti-Christian, anti-Russian dictators, overlords heavily financed by global banking dynasties. The long-range planning intended to turn Russia into an atheist state, a terrible military force that would terrify the Western world into a series of arms races that would further enrich Jacob Schiff, his associates and the Zionists. The Bolshevik Jews in their Russian disguises had an oath to fulfill against the Russian Christian population, and starting in 1918 they would begin carrying out their bloody plans. Russia had banished the Jews many times in its history. Winston Churchill wrote, quote, "There is no need to exaggerate the part played in the creation of Bolshevism and in the actual bringing about of the Russian Revolution by these international and for the most part atheistical Jews." Unquote. Army intelligence officer Captain Shulya, stationed in Russia, wrote in his report to his American superiors, quote, "It is probably unwise to say this loudly in the United States, but the Bolshevik movement is and has been since its beginning guided and controlled by Russian Jews of the greasiest type." Unquote. Report declassified from the National Archives in 1958. David Francis, American ambassador to Russia, wrote, quote, "The Bolshevik leaders here, most of whom are Jews, and 90% of whom are returned exiles, care little for Russia or any other country, but are internationalists, and they are trying to start a worldwide social revolution." Unquote. Also from the National Archives. Director of British Intelligence to the US Secretary of State, quote, "There is now definite evidence that Bolshevism is an international movement controlled by the Jews." Unquote. From the National Archives. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in the 1880s, quote, "A thinker who has at heart the future of Europe will in all his perspectives concerning the future calculate upon the Jews and the Russians as above all the surest and the likeliest factors in the great play and battle of forces." Unquote. One unpopular modern historian puts it, quote, "The media keeps Americans blind to the Jewish influence in our participation in the First World War, just as they had cloaked the pivotal Jewish involvement in the Russian Revolution. The world didn't even learn until 1999 that Lord Balfour was actually a Jew, and while he ostensibly worked for Britain's interest, he secretly worked on behalf of the World Zionist Organization." Unquote. In New York City, the CFR, or Council on Foreign Relations, is created by Colonel Edward Mandel, an organisation designed to commercially and politically forge together the post-war world. This was an internationalist order founded by bankers that would emerge into the main thrust behind the New World Order. In this year, the Habsburg dynasty of Bavaria collapsed. In Portugal, a series of portents occurred and had the country in uproar. 70,000 people watched a vision of the sun moving erratically in the sky before plunging over the horizon. Archaeologists discovered a circular pyramid in Mexico called Cuiculco, dating it at 4,000 years old, but geologists date the lava flow that covered it at 8,000 years old. In Egypt at the Great Pyramid, a tunnel is discovered into the structure. It may have been the tunnel Al-Mamun made in 820 AD. 1. In Search of Noah's Ark. 2. William Dankenbring, quoting Andrew Adams, Prophecy Flash Volume 23. 3. Daniel 12:12-13. 5. Jewish Supremacism. 11. The Story of Philosophy. 13. Rule by Secrecy. 14. The Spear of Destiny. 15. Gladiator. 16. Lost Cities of North and Central America. 1918 AD, 5812 AM. The new Russian secret police became the terror of Russia, a force run by the Bolshevik Jews. Beginning in this year and continuing on through 1959, the Jewish-run concentration camp program in Russia and Siberia saw the extermination by starvation, freezing, torture, executions and labouring to death of 66 million Russian Christians. None of this at the time was reported in the West. 20 million people worldwide died of the influenza epidemic, 548,000 people in America. Combined with the death toll of World War I and the genocide in Russia, these years represent a global depopulation period. A typhoon struck Tokyo, Japan in September, killing 1,600. On April 21, the Red Baron, Manfred von Richthofen, was shot down and American and French forces put a halt on the German advance in the Second Battle of Marne, ending World War I. The British under T.E. Lawrence take Damascus from the Turks. British and French forces occupy Constantinople, taking the city from the Turks. General Allenby of Britain defeats the Turks at the Battle of Megiddo, known as Armageddon Valley. This was exactly 2520 years, 360 times 7, after 603 BC, when foreigners, Egyptians, were defeated by foreigners, Babylonians, for Jerusalem and Judah. The same year that the Israelites, escaping out of Assyrian frontiers, migrated into and settled the Balkans. Interestingly, in 1918, the Baltic states received their independence from Russia. As this was a tragic year for Islamic nations and power, we find it 1296 years after the start of the Muslim Hijra calendar in 622 AD, or 432 times 3 years. 1. Jewish supremacism. 3. Hitchhiker's Guide to Armageddon. 1919 AD, 5813 AM. Mount Kelud of Indonesia erupted in May, killing 5,000. Germany officially surrendered at the Paris Peace Conference with the Treaty of Versailles. Gandhi in India organises a work stoppage protesting the incarceration of Indian dissidents without trial. Riots occur and British soldiers shoot 329 Indians. Civil war in Russia continues as the Bolsheviks grow in power. On May 29th, 2 British expeditions, one in West Africa and the other in Brazil, during an excellent eclipse, were able to photograph stars in the vicinity of the sun, which was obscured by the moon. They compared these photos with ones taken after the sunset and discovered that the stars in their relative positions with each other had changed positions by the space-time curvature near the sun's surface. Einstein's theory of relativity postulated that light would bend passing through a gravitational field, a theory nearly impossible at this time to prove, because the light of the sun blinds us from the light of the stars beyond it. 1. 20th century events. 2. God's laughter. 1920 AD, 5814 AM. The League of Nations is inaugurated. Britain receives a mandate to rule Transjordania and Palestine. The Jewish Bolsheviks win the Russian Civil War, and dissidents and political undesirables vanish by the tens of thousands into labour camps never to be seen again. In the United States, the 19th Constitutional Amendment enfranchises women. Commercial radio broadcasting begins in the USA, and Christian sermons and programming are heard at the inception of this novel form of entertainment. By this year, from 1881, the INS reports that 3,237,079 people migrated from Russia or its satellites to the United States, most of them Jews. The US Congress takes note that the stream of Eastern European migration is taking a toll on the US population, especially because so many of them are absolutely unassimilable. The Jews retaining their own nation within a nation mindset. After the report, Congress began stemming the flow of these immigrants into America. This was the 300th year since the Puritan Pilgrims landed in North America in 1620, and 144 years since the Declaration of Independence was signed. This year is exactly 120 years to the Phoenix Cataclysm in 2040 AD. This was also the year 1656, 414 times 4, of the Christian Coptic calendar. An earthquake kills 20,000 in Gansu, China, and bombs detonated in JP Morgan Bank in New York City, killing 30, but injuring 200 others. In the Annus Mundi calendar, this was the year 5814, which parallels the 5814 pyramid-inch height of the Great Pyramid's completed structure. At present it stands at 5448 pyramid inches high, but this is because the chief cornerstone is not upon it yet. The monument will be complete in 2106 AD at the return of the chief cornerstone. 1. 20th century events. 3. Iron Curtain over America. 1921 AD, 5815 AM. Iraq, formerly known as Babylon, was officially recognised as a kingdom seated at Baghdad on August 23rd by the British. This begins a 70-year countdown to the fall of Baghdad to the United States in 1991 in Operation Desert Storm. Adolf Hitler is 33 years old when he becomes the leader of the German Nationalist Party. The total collapse of the Russian economy results in Lenin's new economic policy. Britain, France and the United States pressured Germany to pay war reparations, the victors placing the blame of the war on Germany, while ignoring how Russia instigated the entire affair. Germany cannot pay the international extortion, and 50% duties are placed on German goods. The Allied Reparations Commission places Germany's debt at 132 billion gold marks, an impossible sum to pay. The international Jewish banking dynasties have set the stage for World War II and the rise of the Nazi nationalist government. An ultimatum is given to Germany to pay 1 billion marks by May, or the Allies will occupy the Ruhr. Germany borrows the money from the Bank of London, which is Rothschild-owned and at great interest. Famine in Russia sees the starvation deaths of 18 million people. 1. 20th century events. 1922 AD, 5816 AM. In India, Gandhi is sentenced to 6 years imprisonment for anti-British activities. Tired of the manipulations of the Jewish industrialist Walter Rathenau, Germans kill him and the Jewish global banking dynasty responds with the hyperinflation of the German mark, which was not at all due to wartime reparations. The Bolsheviks, having totally subdued all Russian opposition, then founded the Jewish-financed Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or USSR. The proclamation was made on December 30th. Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon discovered the hidden tomb of King Tutankhamun in the Valley of the Kings at Luxor, Egypt. This was the first undisturbed Egyptian burial of a famous pharaoh. The crypts were fully intact with funerary relics and buried artefacts. Archaeologists in this year also discovered Mohenjo-Daro, Hill of the Dead, an anciently destroyed city of the Harappan civilization, destroyed in the same year as Sodom and Gomorrah in 1849 BC. This had been an Elamite city. Human skeletons in the open streets have been excavated, holding hands, and they are the most radioactive skeletons ever found. Benito Mussolini sets off a fascist government in Rome, Italy. The Lincoln Memorial is dedicated in Washington, D.C. 1. Viman aircraft. 1923 AD, 5817 AM. The official beginning of the USSR. The Russian Christian people are now enslaved by a foreign people, mostly atheistic Zionist Jews. 100,000 Russians die every year from the brutal slave labour camps all over the nation, as the secretive regime builds military bases and installations. Globalists intend to use the USSR as an instigator to provoke Western markets into a lucrative arms race that will benefit the international weapons manufacturers, the fossil fuel industry and the world banks. A massive quake crippled the city of Tokyo, Japan, the United States sending aid. The sea retreated and returned as a huge tidal wave added to the destruction. Collapsing rubble, burning avalanches and drowning killed 38,000. But more died in the Sagami Bay region, with over 43,000 people pulled out to sea. In Germany was a total economic collapse with mass starvation. The nation was raped of its wealth and resources by the British, French, and the United States. A national hatred of the Jews developed because A. The origins and carrying out of the communist movement was Jewish, mostly of Eastern Europe. B. The Jews of Eastern Europe and elsewhere aided the Jews of Germany, sending them money, allowing them to buy up all the German industries and businesses, and to afford things that German families could not pay for. In Berlin, Germany alone, there were in 1923 AD 150 Jewish banks and only 11 non-Jewish banks. In the United States, President Calvin Coolidge addressed this problem, declaring, quote, "New arrivals should be limited to our capacity to absorb them into the ranks of good citizenship. America must be kept American," unquote. 1. Cataclysm. 2. The Iron Curtain over America. 3. Jewish supremacism. 1924 AD, 58:18 AM. President Calvin Coolidge calls for a strict immigration policy, Immigration Act, in which the national origins principle was strengthened to ensure the British-European ethnic continuity. The US Congressional Record for April 12, 1924, quotes Congressman Knud Wefeld, who in referring to the Jews in America said that they, quote, "have no sympathy with our old-time ideals, who detect our weaknesses and pander to them and get wealthy through the disservices they render us. Our whole system of amusements has been taken over by men who came here on the crest of the South and East European immigration. They produce our horrible film stories, and they write many of the books we read, and edit our magazines and newspapers," unquote. Even at this early date, the American government was aware that Hollywood and the national media was predominantly Jewish. Astronomer Edward Hubble disclosed his discovery that our galaxy is merely one of many, that the universe is made up of many galaxies. A 50-mile-long submarine ridge in the South Atlantic, 15 miles wide, arises 2.5 miles undersea overnight, with no apparent consequences. The Ottoman Empire ends with expulsion of the House of Othman from Turkey. David Davidson was an English engineer who sought to prove Robert Menzies wrong in his theory that the Great Pyramid contained an internal timeline of world history encoded in its measurements. After extensive research on the monument and world history, he released his mammoth book with H. Aldersmith entitled The Great Pyramid, Its Divine Message, his work supporting Menzies' theory. Unfortunately, as with others before and after him, his historical timeline was wrong, having adopted dates of Archbishop James Ussher, which were wrong. Many of his assertions were correct, but the calculations were corrupted. An accurate timeline and demonstration of this amazing pyramid timeline are found in Chronotecture's Lost Science of Prophetic Engineering. 1924 is 1104 years, 552 times 2 from 820 AD. The death of Vladimir Lenin results with a power struggle in the USSR between Joseph Stalin and Leon Trotsky. In India, the British released Gandhi from prison due to health concerns. Native Americans are granted full US citizenship. The Hollywood studio MGM is founded. 1. Jewish supremacism. 2. Invisible residents. 3. 20th century events. 1925 AD, 58:19 AM. The infamous Scopes trial occurred after John T. Scopes, a schoolteacher, was prosecuted for teaching evolution in fundamentalist Tennessee. His attorney was Clarence Darrow, and the pair lost against the oratory of the prosecutor William Jennings Bryan. This trial brought the controversy between creationism and evolutionism to the national level, making the evolutionary model seem more appealing. In August, the Ku Klux Klan holds their first Congress in Washington, D.C., the organisation having over 1 million members. Colonel Fawcett vanished in the unexplored jungles of the Brazilian rainforest, the Mato Grosso, searching for the ancient ruined cities he believed to be located in the area. He had read manuscripts in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, concerning these ruins, as well as reports from earlier explorers who claimed to have visited the megalithic ruins, architecture of Grecian style destroyed by quakes, actually Phoenician. Remains found in the stomach of a sperm whale are the first scientific hard evidence in the existence of the giant squid. 1. Mankind, Child of the Stars. 2. Secret Places of the Lion. 1926 AD, 58:20 AM. The National Broadcasting Company, NBC, debuted with 24 radio stations in the United States. Christian programming makes up 80% of airtime. Joseph Stalin takes power over Trotsky's leftist faction, removing them from the Central Committee. In the USA, Robert Goddard demonstrates the practicality of the liquid-fueled rocket. The world-famous magician and escape artist Harry Houdini died. Dr. Selim Hassan led an expedition underground below the Giza Plateau into a hall connecting the Sphinx to the Second Pyramid, riddled with precision-cut shafts with depths up to 125 feet long and large chambers with huge niches. The main hall was flagstones, 72 feet wide, 864 inches, and 1476 feet in length. Truly heroic underground dimensions, with gigantic blocks. Shafts led hundreds of feet further to large sarcophagus-like crypts, one venerable sarcophagus made of polished white limestone. In this year the Sphinx was excavated to its foundation for the first time in 25 centuries. 1. Dr. Klaus Ulrich Groth. More Egyptian underground secrets revealed. 2. The Great Pyramids. Kortujani. 1927 AD, 58:21 AM. An earthquake kills 200,000 people in Qinghai, China. Another quake collapsed the banks of the Jordan River in Palestine, disrupting its flow for 21 hours, a phenomenon that may have occurred in 1407 BC, when the Israelites passed over the river to conquer Canaan. Charles Lindbergh was first to fly a transatlantic flight, and he did this in 33.5 hours from New York to Paris, France, in a solo flight aboard the Spirit of St. Louis. This was 3,610 miles. Hermann Muller of Germany discovered that X-rays produced mutations. Leon Trotsky was expelled from the Soviet Communist Party. 1. Biblical Antiquities 3. 2. Human Accomplishment. 1928 AD, 58:22 AM. Joseph Stalin of the USSR sends 30 of his rivals, including Leon Trotsky, into exile. Stalin saw all Jewish alliances as a real threat to his own power, removing them from important positions. By doing this, he turned Russia back into a more nationalistic course. The first black and white television sets go on sale in the USA. Amelia Earhart is the first woman to fly the Atlantic. 1. 20th century events. 2. Jewish supremacism. 1929 AD, 58:23 AM. Italy recognises the Vatican City in Rome as an independent state, signalling the re-emergence of the papacy as a political power. The San Francisco Chronicle depicted the event on the front page and reads, quote, Mussolini and Gaspari sign historic pact, heal wound of many years, unquote. This mirrors the prophecy of Revelation 13:3 concerning the papacy, quote, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast, unquote. International bankers and corporate giants deliberately collapsed the American economy as they had done in Germany. The stock market crash on Black Thursday was premeditated to allow the federal government, whose finances are controlled by foreign banks, to exercise tighter controls on the US free market economy. The Piri-Reis map was discovered in the palace of the Sultan of Constantinople, which was originally drawn using older maps in 1513 by the Turkish navigator. The map depicted Antarctica prior to the ice sheets as well as the coasts of South America. This was 476 years after the fall of Constantinople to the Turks in 1453. Dean Byron Cummings of Arizona University and Professor Manuel San Domingo, a Mexican government scientist, discovered human skeletons of men and women that stood 8 foot tall at a site known as Cyclops Necropolis. The Nazis in Germany fight against the Communists in September in Berlin. In Chicago, Al Capone's gang eliminates members of his rivals. The German airship Graf Zeppelin completes an around-the-world flight in 21 days. 1. National Sunday Law. 2. Uncommon Sense. 3. Secret Cities of Old South America. 4. 20th Century Events. 1930 AD, 58:24 AM. A large meteorite crashed into a remote region of Brazil, South America, killing many people. This catastrophe was witnessed by Jesuit missionary Fray Fidelio, who wrote a report to the Vatican and his superiors at Loyola. At Jakarta, Indonesia, Mount Merapi erupted, killing 1,300 people. The name of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, called Constantinople, has its name changed to Istanbul. Frank Whittle invents the jet engine. Clyde Tombaugh discovered Pluto while searching the outer rim of the solar system for planet X at the Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona. Pluto was initially regarded as a planet, but this status was taken from it due to its tiny size and fact that it has no atmosphere and its mass has not cleared the debris around it. Astronomers were convinced, and many still are, that there are other gigantic members of the solar system that account for the anomalies seen in the rotation and orbits of Saturn, Uranus and Neptune. The Canaanite Ras Shamra Ugaritic tablets are discovered, providing historians a plethora of data on the 3rd to 2nd millennium BC Near East. Gandhi's Salt March begins a campaign of civil disobedience in India, and the British again imprison him. 360 days after its first flight, the largest air vessel ever built, the British R-101, explodes in France, killing 44 people. In Germany, unemployment reaches 3 million, and the Nazi Party rises in strength among the people. In the United States, unemployment reaches 4.5 million as the Great Depression sets in on America. 1. Secret cities of old South America. 2. Human accomplishment. 3. 20th century events. 1931 AD, 58:25 AM. The Yellow River flood in China killed 3,700,000 people. The flooding covered an area the size of New Jersey. A quake in New Zealand kills 256 people. The Indian leader Gandhi is released from prison and signs the New Delhi Pact, ending civil disobedience in exchange for British concessions. The Empire State Building is built, becoming the tallest building in the world in New York, at 1,250 feet high, 102 stories. Though this is 770 feet higher than the Great Pyramid, it would still take 10 Empire State Buildings worth of masonry to equal the mass of the Great Pyramid. The German banks collapse and are closed. The gangster Al Capone is sentenced to 11 years for tax evasion in Chicago. 1. The incredible discovery of Noah's Ark. 2. 20th century events. 1932 AD, 58:26 AM. The Japanese secured their dominion over Chinese Manchuria, then began military excursions against the Chinese, invading the province of Jehol. Charles Lindbergh's son Junior was kidnapped and murdered. His body found, and Bruno Richard Hauptmann was captured and executed for the crime. The cave, known as the Oracle of the Sibyl, was discovered at Cumae, Italy. The first asteroid determined to be an Earth crosser was discovered, designated as 1862 Apollo. The British controlled Palestine and they restricted Jewish immigration into the area. Hitler of the Nazi Party colluded with a Zionist agency called the Mossad le'Aliyah Bet in a plan to smuggle Jews into the Palestine region. With the Nazi-Mossad alliance, many Jews secretly migrated into Palestine, the human smuggling operation increasing dramatically in 1938 and 1939. This was known as the Ha'avara Transfer Agreement. Much Jewish wealth was moved into Palestine. Germany aided in the creation of the Jewish state more than any other nation through the entire 1930s, but this data is kept from the public record in post-World War II, as the victors rewrote history to paint the Nazis in the most dreadful colours. This revisionist history was done to justify the war crimes the Allies conducted upon the German civilian population. In this year, the Nazis, German nationalists, won elections in Prussia, Bavaria, Württemberg and Hamburg. Iraq, Babylon, achieved independence and is entered into the League of Nations. 1. The Jesus Papers. 2. Jewish supremacism. 3. 20th century events. 1933 AD, 58:27 AM. On January the 28th, Adolf Hitler is elected Chancellor of Germany. 1 month later, the Reichstag building was destroyed in a fire, that was discovered to be an active communist in Germany opposing the Nazi Party. Hitler vows to deal with the Jewish problem in Germany, the manipulation of the press and commercial markets. Freedom of the press is suspended in Germany. At the death of President Paul von Hindenburg of Germany, Hitler of the Nazi Party became also President of Germany. He was passionately against communism and ran a strictly German for Germans campaign against the only other political party, the Communists, who were largely Khazar Jews. To Hitler, communism was a world menace, but his political opponents in communism were hypocritical rich elitists, a minority, who during the financial crash of 1923 in Germany acquired immense wealth. In March at a Geneva disarmament convention, Britain proposed a reduction in European militaries and Germany walked out. In the following months, in April, a nationwide boycott in Germany of Jewish shops and businesses is carried out by the people, and Hitler is catapulted into power as 92% of Germans voted for the Nazi Party. Seeing the writing on the wall in Germany, before this, the wealthy Jews of Germany petitioned for help from the United States. In Amsterdam, an international Jewish boycott conference was convened with the World Jewish Economic Federation. The economics boycotts and the powerhouse of the New York prestigious newspaper and radio propaganda machines, already controlled by Jewish money. The Roosevelt administration, through intelligence reports, already knew that the information the media spouted by the Jews against the Germans was untrue, but neglected to intervene. The March 24th edition of the London newspaper The Daily Express, the front page headline read, "Judea declares war on Germany," reporting on the decision of the World Jewish Congress that met in New York to engage in an economic war against the National Socialist Germany. This Congress expressed the interests of the Jewish international industrialists and bankers, and is the true origin of the events leading up to World War II. While Germany is but one nation, the Jews are international and deeply entrenched in over 55 countries around the world. Realising the immense power these people wielded in international politics, Hitler was forced to regard the Jews in Germany as a hostile state within the nation. This begins Hitler's 144 months, 12 years of power. In 1933, H.G. Wells wrote that World War III would occur from events that take place in Basra, Iraq. This was 70 years before the American invasion of Iraq and occupation of Basra in 2003. The Japanese invasion of Manchuria reached the Great Wall of China. Japan and Germany exit the League of Nations. President Franklin D. Roosevelt survived an assassination attempt in Miami, Florida, which killed Chicago Mayor Anton J. Kermack. The gunman Giuseppe Zangara was captured and executed. Admiral Richard Byrd discovered the remains of a petrified forest only 100 miles away from the South Pole. 1. 20th century events. 2. The Iron Curtain over America. 3. Auschwitz Prologue. 4. William Dankenbrink, Prophecy Flash Volume 22. 5. In Search of Noah's Ark. 1934 AD, 58:28 AM. Hitler and the Nazi Party purged the government of those who believed themselves to be hidden among them, enemies of the German people allied to foreign interests. In Russia, the Communist Party also conducts a purge of their own. Hitler consolidates the German military after disbanding the 3 million strong Storm Detachment. Hitler, with the consent of the German people, assumes the role of Commander-in-Chief of the armed forces. It was only after World War II and the international pillaging of Germany and enslavement of millions of Germans, who never returned to Germany, did the international Jewish-controlled media refer to him as a dictator. Adolf Hitler was loved by the Germans because he gave them jobs and gave Germany an economy free of the control of Jewish banks. In the USA, the Great Depression worsens and dust storms sweep over the southern states in May, removing about 300 million tonnes of topsoil. Bonnie and Clyde are shot dead by Texas Rangers. Donald Duck first appears in Walt Disney's The Orphan's Benefit. 1. Rule by secrecy. 2. 20th century events. 1935 AD, 58:29 AM. Italy invades Ethiopia, Abyssinia, and is condemned by the international community. President Roosevelt had the Great Seal of the United States published on US currency, the famous Great Pyramid and Eye, and on the obverse the eagle in the same stance as its predecessor, the phoenix. On the seal, the eagle holds 13 arrows and an olive branch, with 13 leaves and 13 olives, ancient symbols of the house of Israel and the tribe of Joseph, Manasseh and Ephraim, born in Egypt. Manasseh, Great Britain, and Ephraim, the United States, called the branch, which is identified in Scripture with arrows. The Great Pyramid has 13 levels of bricks like the Pyramidion atop the Washington Monument obelisk. Affirming the ancient Israelite heredity and affiliation with the USA, Great Britain's Great Seal on the obverse depicts an image of the Sphinx. The number 13 is an occult reference to the 13 tribes of Israel, as well as a modern reference to the 13 colonies of England that broke away to become the United States. The eagle's beak has a scroll of 13 letters in Latin, E pluribus unum, or one out of many. This is the motto of the Empire of Adoption, the fulfillment of the Old Testament's Israelite cities of refuge. America is the new Israel, and just as ancient Israel was at war with Judah, so too do the descendants of Judah still make war against the naive and unwitting citizens of America and the European nations. Also on the dollar bill are the 13 letters Annuit Coeptis, quote, God has prospered our beginning, unquote. Washington's portrait on the dollar bill is framed by a cleverly concealed Greek omega symbol, the sign of the end. Additionally, the O and R letters beginning and ending $1 provide the linear foundation for a geometric pyramid that has for its symmetrical apex George Washington's portrait's eye. Persia formally changes its name to Iran under the Shah Pahlavi. Antarctic expeditions continue with bird discovering more evidence of fossil leaves, trees, and various species of giant ferns at the South Pole. Charles Richter invents the Richter scale for the measurement of earthquake magnitude. In Germany, the Nuremberg laws condemn the Jews and the swastika is adopted as the official flag of Germany. The American Social Security Act is passed. 1. Romans 11:24. 2. America and Britain, our identity revealed. 4. Secret symbols of the dollar bill. 5. Path to the pole. 1936 AD, 58:30 AM. In Germany, the Jews remaining behind and political dissidents are interned in concentration camps. International Jews continue economic sanctions against Germany, and Hitler employs the German people in government-paid programs, building the nation's military forces in the face of the loss of world trade amidst what he considered was a hostile British, French, American, Soviet encirclement. Hitler appeals to President Roosevelt for a summit to discuss difficulties, declaring that Germans wanted peace with America and calling for the USA to cease its harsh economic policies against Germany. Hitler was denied a meeting. Through 1938, Germany continually attempted to appeal to the USA, and every attempt was censored from the American public by the Jewish-dominated media. The Roosevelt administration was largely influenced and financed by international Jews, and sought to engage Germany in war, but needed to have Germany act as aggressor to gain public opinion favouring a conflict. Germany and Japan enter into an alliance intended to combat international communism. Hitler opens the first Volkswagen, people's car, factory in Saxony. The Nazi government retrieves a crashed UFO. This incident began a reverse engineering program and was not discovered by the world until US forces raided the complex in World War II. This year was exactly 2520 years, 360 by 7, after the fall of Judah in 585 BC to Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon. In the United States, the Hoover Dam, originally Boulder Dam, on the Colorado River is completed, creating the world's largest reservoir. The 11th Olympic Games are held in Berlin, Germany, and the black athlete Jesse Owens wins 4 gold medals for the United States. King George V of Britain died and is succeeded by Edward VIII, who 11 months later abdicates to be with his American lover, Mrs. Wallace Simpson, a married woman. He is succeeded by his brother, George VI. 1. Iron Curtain over America. 3. 20th century events. 4. Hidden mysteries. 1937 AD, 58:31 AM. Attempting to fulfill their agreement with the Jewish Mossad organisation to move the Jews into Palestine, Hitler inquires of the British government if he can fund a program to mass migrate the German Jewish population to Palestine, for Britain controlled Palestine by mandate. Hitler is offered Egypt as a viable second alternative and promised that Germany would fund the entire migration. Many German Jews accepted, and after Britain refused to allow Hitler to engage in the program, these Jews were safely moved out of the country. But many refused to move, and they were interned in the country's concentration camp factory complexes. The German airship Hindenburg explodes at Lakehurst, New Jersey, killing 36 people. This ended commercial airship travel. The gigantic airship was 804 feet in length, and the explosion was captured on film. Another air disaster involved the disappearance of Amelia Earhart, flying solo over the Pacific Ocean. Although she has never been found, nor the wreckage, artefacts on a Pacific island were recently discovered that indicate that she survived the crash and lived for a time on a small island. The Golden Gate Bridge opens to traffic across the San Francisco Bay. At New London, Texas, a gas explosion at a school killed 300 students and teachers, and is still considered the worst school disaster in US history. An asteroid seen by astronomers passes only 500,000 miles away from Earth, called Hermes. At Hong Kong, the Great Typhoon killed over 10,000 people. Also in China, a 5-year archaeological expedition was concluded at the ruins of Anyang, where Chinese archaeologists excavated tens of thousands of archaic Chinese texts upon animal bones and turtle shells, at the site known as the capital city of Yin of the Shang dynasty, overthrown by the Xian dynasty. These records indicate a dynastic change contemporary with the events of 1447 BC, when the Israelites escaped a ruined Egypt, and natural disasters occurred around the world. In 1937 AD, the Japanese renew their war efforts in China, starting the Sino-Japanese War. They capture Peking, now called Beijing, in July. 1. Jewish supremacism. 2. 20th century events. 3. End of Eden.